All right, we are live. Thank you for coming on, Isaiah. We're going to talk about the culture code, and I think there probably will be some others popping on today,
I hope
popping in
so.
and out. It's usually free form in that way. So Andrew, he shows up pretty much 100% of the time. We just can never predict when that will be.
Fair enough.
So
I might
he
have to
will be
drop out
here.
early too.
Yeah, he will probably be here. I just don't know when. My guess is 8 o'clock by the latest, but we'll see.
Okay.
But yeah, we're here to talk about the Culture Code, a book I've actually just finished reading yesterday. I previously listened to it on audiobook, and I thought it had some pretty interesting ideas. I do know that it's chock full of anecdotes and not so much full of like overall stats. But hey, it's a good look into what makes some groups successful. He tries to find the things that are in common with all of these groups. Um, and what are your thoughts about the overall veracity of the book?
Well, it's a self-help book, and
Mm-hmm.
Dan Coyle is not a scientist, and
Mm-hmm.
he's not a expert on culture as it is. But as a self-help book for people who are trying to build effective teams in America, it's very effective at that. Um, there are a lot of situations where the advice in the book wouldn't necessarily apply, and there are groups in which it will apply. Uh, things that really didn't speak to me at all were like the valorization of the Navy SEALs in this book. I didn't appreciate that part because I mean, military groups have good things and bad things about them, but the most important thing for how they work is an effective command structure and lots of money. And with the other groups, like the basketball team, what was it? The Spurs, right?
Yes.
That one is another interesting thing because like there's a level of parity in that environment, but it's also a very specific environment with very specific uh incentives and disincentive structures. Does that make sense?
It does. I know most of the incentive structures surrounding a lot of the groups they follow is basically work related and has to deal with turning a profit.
Yeah.
Um, I guess that the difference would be, I guess, the SEAL group, which really isn't that's not a profit motive, and
Yeah.
specifically for the people who are being sent out there to do their thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no, they don't really give an example of a group that it's very Western society centric. I'm kind of would be interested to see if there were similar things that they could look into as far as how Eastern societies work and their group building. Um, because there's certainly stuff to look at there as well. Like I know, I don't even think I could talk about this, but there are specific aspects of the way Toyota runs its company that Amazon has adopted.
Yeah. I forget what it is. The
Oh,
exact
do
term
you know
for
what
it.
the Andon line is or the Andon cord is?
Uh no, I have not
Okay, it's a
heard that term.
specific, yeah, it's a specific thing that Toyota came up with that gives any person on the assembly line the ability to stop production
Okay.
if they see something bad instead of having to go through a bunch of red tape and talking to management. If somebody would know if something's wrong if they're on the actual production line, they would be the most experienced in being able to determine if there's a production issue right there in their face.
Yeah.
So to give like the regular workers the power. to cease production in order to address an issue.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like in the Air Force, there's a similar thing for flight crews, in which at any point in time somebody could, you know, basically call a safety issue out, and it must be addressed by everybody. It doesn't matter if it's the lowliest of airmen or a an officer. If there is a safety issue present, then it is the responsibility of anybody who spots it to address it and get the rest of the crew to address it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially with any aviation. Because I know I have a friend that was working, or actually he's studying to become a aircraft mechanic, and he's like, yeah, there's like ridiculous levels of redundancy systems, and it's like super difficult to do anything on an aircraft without having to do it twice, basically, because of the
Yeah.
redundancy systems. So, and you're in the air, so one little disaster up there spells doom for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's like it's not like you could pull off to the side of the road if you're at 30,000 feet.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I totally understand that. But yeah, one of the things I noticed, because I was right after the culture code, I listened to the talent code. The two books do overlap, and I do see that there's kind of a set audience. It sounds like the book is really trying to target business leaders and people who are in leadership positions. Like even the book, I guess, trailer and promotional materials seem driven in that direction.
Well, yeah, it's definitely towards that specific audience, and even more so, like the Talent Code is a better book, I think, much better, because within what the Culture Code misses is like a real description of these groups that he's looking at, and all the minutia that goes into how they operate, not good or bad, because he's looking at picking out specific traits of these groups that can help
Hmm.
in a specific way, versus um looking at the groups as they are and how they operate, and see how that influences the people in it, how the culture can how the people meet their goals more so than what is quote unquote success,
Yeah, that's true. Because if you think about it, it's not the focus of the groups in the culture code. The goals themselves are not really a part of the discussion, whether it be going on some assassination mission, robbing a bank or jewelry store, or winning a championship game. I know they kind of gloss over what the purpose of what these groups are actually, what their end goals are. But I did, after listening to the talent code, I also noticed that he based a lot of his stuff more on statistics. Like, for instance, he was trying to figure out what made, um, I guess, music
You still there?
effect and which ones were more successful.
You got cut
And
off there.
statistics. Oh, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, so one of the things he talked about in the talent code was that was statistically based. He was looking at all of these different teachers, and specifically teachers of music, singing, everything in that vein. And he found out that the most successful teachers aren't actually the most financially successful people. They typically um, are pretty they're like maybe lower class, working class. They typically don't have advanced degrees, and in any, they're not even well educated usually.
Yeah.
So he was trying to find out what things created these little environments and what anomalies that could be looked at. But it's not like, oh, I want to be a good music teacher, so I'm not going to get an advanced degree. That'll just hurt me. Yeah, I don't see it as like really a pathway to find talent, but as what are the factors that join these instructors together. And the talent code is basically about the instructor, and the culture code is more about the group.
I think the culture code is more about like basic tenets that Dan Coyle observed in these specific groups. And like some of these things are good, some of these things are not as good. And there are things that can be applied as needed in certain situations. But overall, like I said, it's a self-help book, and there's nothing wrong with it being a self-help book, but it's not like describing it's not a thick description of any of the groups that he observed.
No, it's pretty short, like the book itself. Um, Cutting out all the fluff at the end is about 240 odd pages.
Yeah.
And each chapter kind of covers a group, and I think there's like 17-ish chapters. So he doesn't spend a whole lot of time describing the inner workings of a lot of these groups.
Yeah.
You just kind of get like a glossy overview of what these groups might be doing differently, but it's not very specific or very detailed, and it doesn't cover every single facet of possibility of what makes these groups work well together. And even if a group works well together, that doesn't even mean that they're going to be successful either.
And even if
So
they're successful, that doesn't make it depends on what your definition of success is too.
yeah, so like some of the best groups, like if I'm talking about like the game industry, the best studio that I worked for had the most commercially unsuccessful product.
Yeah.
Like we didn't make a super awesome product that made millions of dollars, but I loved working with those people. It was like the most fun I've ever had as a game developer. And then you go into the most successful game I ever worked on was actually made the most money for that year,
Mhm.
and it was so fucking hard. Um, like the toll was just crazy. There were a lot of problems with the group dynamics, like lots of bickering and complaining about management. Um, just basically, I wouldn't say it was a horrendous experience, but it was um, probably at the opposite end of the experience I had with that smaller group that wasn't successful
Yeah.
financially. But it's there's still those things. I think he just looked at, okay, these are groups that are successful but also work well together. But
Yeah.
those things aren't always mutually exclusive.
Yeah. I mean, to give a basic rundown of what's in the book, there's three parts. The first part is to build safety, the second part is to share vulnerability, and the third part is to establish purpose. And I I see them as like these three parts as ways to effectively build teams. And I what I what I have a little bit of apprehension about is, using culture as a fiat for this organizational structure,
Mm.
because it's like a small C culture instead of a big C culture, and leading with culture in this is kind of not necessarily reflective of how groups work, because I was expecting more of how groups work and therefore, you know, are successful, rather than these are some points that these groups do and these are successful groups, because like the reasoning's backwards. You're looking at a successful somebody who makes success in some way, shape, or form, and that measure is arbitrary. Like for the for the Spurs, yeah, they won several championships, but also the Lakers won a lot of championships and their culture was completely different. And the a number of other teams, the freaking what's that other fucking team?
Well, I know
The
that
Warriors. The Warriors won a lot
Coyle,
of championships.
yeah,
And like,
Coyle said that he specifically chose the Spurs because with the actual players that they had, that according to some type of analysis, he shouldn't have been as winning as he had.
yeah, but that's arbitrary as well, because on any given game anybody can win. And like, you can say the same thing about Tom Brady. Tom Brady should have never been the winningest fucking Super Bowl playoff quarterback of all time, or even if he isn't. But like, the point of that is that these games are not algorithms. They're
True.
they're human endeavors. Human endeavors are sticky and messy. So to assign an arbitrary value based on you know a metric analysis doesn't get the deeper understanding of either the person or the group. And like, that's, I don't know. I didn't really like the culture code, is what I'm trying to get at. And I thought the talent code was good.
The
And
talent code, I thought yes. If I were to say which one's better, the talent code definitely is. Um, and that's because it's easier to focus on individuals than it is on groups. Group
I
dynamics are just freaking difficult.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think the talent code didn't seem like it was trying to sell me something, whereas the culture code does.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Like the talent code isn't trying to teach you how to cultivate talent, while the culture code is trying to sell you on how do you create a successful group.
Yeah, it's like the whole purpose of the books are very different. Like, maybe it was an editorial choice that drove the direction of the book, but like, it doesn't describe how cultures work. It doesn't have anything about what a culture is. It
Hmm.
doesn't have much about, the intersection between the individual and the group, so much as it has just like 12
And
rules
there's
for group
also
building.
there's no intersection between like the group itself and the macro culture above that group
Yeah.
either.
Yeah, because all these things are nested within each other. And the reason why, like with the SEALs, the reason why the SEALs are very effective is because they have a high attrition rate in their training, and they have a lot of confidence in their from their upper echelon command that they will do the job, and they have a lot of leeway given to them from their upper echelons to accomplish their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And we can have a discussion about whether or not there should be special forces at all in the military,
Mm-hmm.
but compare compare the SEALs with the 82nd Airborne Division, right? The 82nd is one of the most famous units in the US Army, but like, they have none of these things that were described in the about the SEALs,
Mm.
and they're combat effective, and like
Yeah.
the Green Berets are combat effective, and they do a lot of the similar things that the SEALs do. The only difference between the SEALs and the fucking Green Berets is that Green Berets actually keep their mouth shut, but that's besides the point.
That's pretty funny.
Oh, and slightly less war crimes too when we're talking about the SEALs, but that's
Slightly
besides the
less war
point.
crimes. You mean for the SEALs?
No, for the Green Berets. They're,
Oh, okay. I thought they kept their mouth shut because there would be more war crimes.
no,
Um, I'm just gonna get a little bit on a tangent. What do you think of the Eddie Gallagher situation?
I think that was a bungled fucking prosecution on all fronts, and I'm kind of disgusted with the military justice system.
It's absurd, right? It's
Yeah,
ridiculously absurd.
and I'm not even going to mention the external influences on the case, but like it was bungled. Like there's no way that Gallagher should have gotten off for that. And did you see that? Did you see that other thing where an entire SEAL unit was redeployed back to San Diego due to? They said it was because they were quote unquote drinking on the 4th of July, but then reports came out that a senior NCO in the unit had raped a female service member on the
Oh,
base that they were stationed at.
holy shit! No, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, it's crazy, and those guys will. They're tight-lipped about some things, but like you said, yeah, it's pretty bad. Like I couldn't believe how a guy who basically admitted in court that he stabbed some dude in the neck, and then they charged some other guy for killing him. What was it, like the medic? They said that the medic killed the guy. It's like,
something like
really? It's
that.
like, okay, cause and effect. You guys aren't gonna think about that.
Yeah, there's
So,
multiple. There's like everybody in the dude's unit said that he was a fucking crazy person who would just take pot shots at people, you know,
yeah, yeah.
at
It
civilians.
didn't. It wasn't surprising to me that can happen. Like, I guess there's less accountability in the special forces. Would you say that's
That's
true?
true. That's definitely true.
Yeah.
I mean,
So,
they have everything from fucking like they don't have to follow the same weapons regulations, so they have different weapons than standard issue, all the way down to relaxed grooming standards. You know, so
yeah, they can have beards and all that.
yeah, for no other reason than because they can.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know, man. It's just kind of appalling
A
that
bunch of them get popped for steroids every year. A bunch of them get popped for other shit. Like it's
do they actually care that they're doing steroids
they care.
about the steroids.
They care in
Uh,
quotes.
oh, okay. Unquote. Yeah, they probably tacitly like approve it, like most sports organizations.
Well, it's a matter of the command structure, right? Like, so they're subject to the UCMJ and all regulations that are applied to all Navy units. But at the same time, my understanding is that the senior leaders from the enlisted side and from the officer side are kind of like turn a blind eye to a lot of this shit.
I guess they rather, I don't know, but that's another whole topic altogether.
And like that's part of the problem, like that intense camaraderie thing that, you know,
The loyalty thing. I think that was one of the things that Gallagher was going on about after his acquittal.
Yeah,
and
that's
how important loyalty was. It's like Jesus Christ.
yeah, loyalty's not important if you're committing war crimes. That's the thing. Like if you're committing war crimes, you're committing war crimes and you need to be held accountable for that. But, you know, there's a difference between a buddy fucker and a whistleblower, and like too often people think that being a whistleblower is being a buddy fucker, and that's not good for anybody, and it makes the environment worse for everybody.
Yeah, because it's going to be bad for these SEALs that made like the whistleblowers. They're going to probably not be in the SEALs very long, I can
Well,
imagine.
there was another case where 3 SEALs murdered a Green Beret in Africa because they were trying to run a scam, like a drug smuggling scam or some shit. So
Jesus.
like that they're not good, man.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's like Hollywood movie like origin right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but like the valorization of these people is another thing that I have a problem with. Like,
Chris Kyle.
yeah, Chris Kyle, that's a fucking huge problem.
American Sniper.
Yeah, that's fucking jerk off session for people wearing fucking 9-line shirts. But it's I don't know, man. The point is that like there are a lot of things that make groups good, and there's a lot of things that make groups bad, but every group is different, and you can take stuff like take lessons from some groups, but like it doesn't necessarily mean that that will make your group successful. I think that's the underlying issue that I have with the culture code, because you know a freaking a classroom a is not a platoon,
Mhm.
and you know a race car team is not an NBA team. So like every group's gonna have different things that they need to fucking do. And like building safety. So let's tackle that, right?
Okay.
Building safety. The chapters in this section are the good apples, the $1 billion day when nothing happened, the Christmas truce, the 1 hour experiment, and the missile years, how to build belonging, how to design for belonging, and ideas for action, right?
Yeah.
So, like I said, it's a self-help book. So it'll give a number of anecdotes, and then it'll say what from these anecdotes can we take and apply for our own goals, right?
Hmm.
Our in quotes own goals, right? Uh so the good apples is like one bad apple will ruin a bunch type thing. So you have to
Yeah.
get rid of toxic individuals, like people
But
who are not
also there
bought
was an
into the
anecdote where the bad apple had zero effect.
yeah, there's also that.
Because it's like, what are you going to do? Get rid of the bad apple, or is there just a way to construct your group where one bad apple doesn't really matter at all?
Yeah, there's that too. Um, what's the key takeaway from the first chapter?
Well, they're trying to say that you can make your groups bad apple proof. And that's basically based on certain communication styles within the group, which basically hinge on openness. And I think what he's trying to present there is that the vulnerability aspect will enable a group to be able to resist bad appleness or de-evolution because of bad apples.
Yeah, I mean, there's a list that he has here. Um, I'm gonna read a passage. He gives a list of groups, and then he says, "When I visited these groups, I noticed a distinct pattern of interaction. The pattern was located not in the big things, but in the little moments of social connection. The interactions were consistent whether the group was a military unit, or a movie studio, or an inner city school. I made a list. Close physical proximity, often in circles, profuse amounts of eye contact, physical touch, lots of short, energetic exchanges, no long speeches, high levels of mixing, everyone talks to everyone, few interruptions, lots of questions, intensive, active listening, humor and laughter, and small, attentive courtesies, right? So,
Hmm.
all those things are good things, right?
Yeah.
And they're generalities. And that's basically how you can tell that there is low amounts of social distance between two people is if they have, the comfortability and close relationship with another person to do these things, as well as the uh the respect for each other to, give them the floor to talk, or say thank you and please and hold the door and all that stuff. you know
Hmm.
you can tell that those people are close, and close people tend to work better together. That's not always the case, but I think that's a way that you can make a generality, right?
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
But like, even those things are superficial because it doesn't look at different culture, like real cultural cues or cultural stoppages, or like psychological issues of the group members. Some people just don't like to be touched, you know?
Hmm.
So is that person a bad apple? Is that person contradictory to your goals? Like, people are different. And I think that, you know, there are a lot of things that are good there, but there are a lot of things that are missing.
Well, I definitely feel that they're trying to he's trying to exclude specific types of people
Yeah.
from the equation. I don't think that's all that
That's
helpful.
exactly it. Is that the culture code is exclusionary instead of inclusive, whereas the talent code is inclusive rather than exclusionary.
Yeah, I'll agree. It definitely looks like, because I know one of because they talk about the little slogans that these people have, and I believe one of the slogans was definitely about how important it is on who you actually choose to be a part of the team.
Yeah.
So it's definitely exclusionary based off of a specific amount of traits.
Yeah. And like, looking at the Seals or looking at the Spurs or looking at Pixar, you know, it's kind of funny because all these things are highly competitive for entry. Like I
Yeah,
mentioned
because I
before,
think
there's
even the Pixar, just working in the cafeteria, it's pretty highly competitive. Like
exactly.
they're very they're very selective about even hiring people who are in traditionally low positions that have nothing to do with the actual process of making a film.
Yeah. To me, it feels very elitist the way that these quote unquote successful groups are selected.
Hmm.
But
I
that's
think
a function
less.
that's a function of
The
the goal of the book, though.
I do, yeah, I agree. There are some cases where I don't so much, which is maybe like the Spurs example, but that's it's pretty squishy at that, because they're trying to say that, oh, okay, he didn't have the best players, but he was really good with what he had. I think that would probably be a better approach to looking at how the form groups, instead of being like extremely selective. Like, what are we trying to do in society? Are we going to basically select out certain traits and make them unhireable, or undesirable in successful companies? It's kind of yeah, there is a kind of a double-edged sword with regard of how they're how he approaches who would be inclusionary in a successful group or not.
Yeah. So to point point of contrast, if he had chosen like, let's say that he had chosen a high school basketball team,
Hmm.
or even like, you know, not even a basketball team, but like a a soccer team that is like less exclusive, like
Hmm.
like a third or fourth tier English soccer team, or like a minor league baseball team, you know.
Hmm.
And let's say he had chosen just a regular army unit, you know,
Yeah,
say in
something
the
that's not
82nd.
as hard to get in, something that there's going to be a larger swath of personalities and backgrounds.
Exactly.
It's, it's
And let's
like
say that
the SEAL is the Navy SEALs is very specific mindset there.
yeah, you're not going to get a group of Navy SEALs that are going to successfully crew a C-17 the way that a C-17 crew would crew a C-17, you know. I'm sure they could learn, but it's still a different culture doing different things. And like, which one's more important? You can't really say, but which one's more sexy to a New York Times
Well,
selling
yeah,
author?
they're definitely picking sexy ones.
Yeah,
Like
that
I would have loved if he went into going into Toyota and seeing how they operate and how, okay, we got even the lowliest person has a say in how the production of the vehicles work. Like, okay, this person here is having trouble screwing in this part, and we're actually going to listen to him and see what he says.
or
And we're
even
going,
like or even like Fender guitars, you know?
yeah.
Like you can go
So,
into any group and they're going to be different, and they're all going to, I think his point is that they're all going to have these certain traits that he lists, but they don't.
yeah, yeah. Because I guess because even some of the groups, I think there was like a footnote in one of the groups that it was actually currently not doing as well as it had.
Yeah.
I think who was it? Um, I don't remember which group it was, but like, oh, okay, things change, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
But
Anyway,
I'd say it's not horrible. It's not horrible advice. Some of it's okay. I think, especially the stuff about vulnerability. Like, I know there's going to be people who are very closed that won't want to really talk about much about their personal lives or even some people that yeah there are people that don't like like they flinch when you touch them, they're not used to being in close proximity of people. Like I get that,
yeah.
but it really doesn't tell you how to deal with those people.
Yeah. Well, at the end of the day, it's a, like I said before, it's a self-help book written for a very specific audience. And if you are within that audience, then it can be very helpful for you. If you're not, it's somewhat interesting rather. And on that merit of the interestingness, um, I don't think that it outweighs the lack of analysis. And I don't want to say that he didn't do a good job, because he did a good job. I just don't think the book is written for me.
Yeah, you would like something more comprehensive, is what you're saying.
Well, I read a lot of ethnographies, right? So an ethnography is basically a deep dive into one specific group. And like every group has goals that are set for them, right? Whether or
Hmm.
not they're deliberate or they're inherited or they're de facto, it doesn't matter. Every group has specific goals, and every individual in a group has their own specific goals. And, you know, people work together to achieve those things.
Yeah, I kind of. Would you say that this book borders on? Hmm. Is there's like this I know it's a self-help book, but would you would say it's like the 12 rules of life
Well,
for
I
groups?
made a joke earlier about that.
Because I don't think Daniel Coyle is at all like a bad writer, a lot like Peterson, who's Peter Peterson is just a stream of consciousness, and you're like, okay, like I can finish 12 rules for life, but it's like, man, this guy is just all over the place. He's not very focused. He's kind of extremely redundant, and
Yeah.
the book is very bloated. I was like, man, this is.
Yeah.
I'm reading 90 pages that could have been condensed in maybe 10 or less.
Yeah. Daniel Coyle is definitely a better author than Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, well, Daniel Coyle doesn't bloat his writing. That's why his books are so short.
Yeah.
It's really straight to the point, and he's not really trying to rehash the same sentence like every other page, like some people who want to bloat their books for profit. I think
Yeah.
he does an overview. It's not a deep dive. It's definitely an overview, and it's definitely worth just kind of. It's not a blueprint, but it's definitely something to look into when you're dealing with groups of people.
Yeah. I do think there are useful things in it. Like if I were to give it a score out of 5, I'd give it like 3 1/4.
3 1/4, so
Yeah, and
above average.
I'd give the talent code a 4. So
4, closer to excellence.
yeah.
And I think the talent code is shorter, if I'm not mistaken. Even shorter than that in
Yeah.
the culture code.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a decently quick read. I read half the book yesterday. It's one of those books that you can kind of speed read. I don't know if what I'm doing is speed reading, but I can get through each page in less than a minute.
Yeah. It flows nice and like it's easy to understand.
Oh yeah, it's not prose. You know, you don't have to worry about.
Well, it is
Uh,
prose, but it's not
it's not. It's
prosaic.
like, yeah, there you go. What was the third chapter about, or the third part of the book about?
That is establishing purpose, which to me it seems like it should have been the first part, but
Yeah, so establishing purpose. That is kind of like an arbitrary thing, though, isn't it? Like,
yeah. Well, all these things are arbitrary.
I get it, but I do understand partially the need for people, like the vulnerability, from what I understand, is when someone is vulnerable, they're actually putting something on the line for the group.
Well, that's skin in the game by what is it? Taleb. Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
So it's basically he has a book based off of that concept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I guess that whole concept is basically that's what the vulnerability concept is. That if someone is willing to put skin in the game, they're basically more trustworthy and possibly easier to deal with.
Yeah,
To an
sure.
extent, because if someone has skin in the game and things are going not so great, um, those people would probably be the most difficult to deal with.
Yeah. Well, I think there should be more focus on stressors, like group stressors and individual stressors in the group.
Is
And
that something that you've come across in your studies?
stress and how that relates to group dynamics.
Yeah.
Yes. very much so. Like there's a an ethnography that I have about MS-13 in LA, and they're under stress all the time, and a lot of their behavior is based on that stress and precarity, you know?
Mhm.
So like you could say that MS-13 is a very successful group, and their group dynamics are very different than what is presented in the culture code.
Yeah, I guess you could say that in some type of way. I do. He does touch on criminal groups, including that Pink Panther group, but
Yes.
it also depends on what you're considering successful.
Well, it's also he goes for sexy instead
Gritty.
of unsexy or ugly. Like he doesn't talk about the Sinaloa cartel.
Yeah, that's true. They were, or even what's his name, Escobar,
Yeah,
like, and his ridiculous drug empire at the height of it.
yeah. Because
Yeah.
you can't say good things about drug dealers. Thieves, sure, not drug dealers, and only a very specific type of thief as well.
Yeah, it has to be a jewelry thief
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't hurt anybody. They plan heists and they try not to get. It has to be ones that don't get caught. So I don't know. That's weird. I think he's just, and it seems like the groups really that he's specifically kind of pointing to are ones that become, I guess, autonomous without the need of an overseer, but that's not really the case for most of those groups,
Yeah. But
except
anyway,
for the Pink Panther group.
I am going to shut it down for myself right now, if that's all right with you.
No, that's completely fine. Like, I guess nobody else said anything.
Yeah,
We're already nearing 8 o'clock, and
yeah,
everyone's like, "Mom."
yeah,
So yeah, we could certainly, um, yeah, we could end things for today. If they want to come later and talk about it, they certainly can, and I can restart it. But yeah, I think yeah, we talked for almost an hour here.
yeah.
But yeah, man, great. So Isaiah gives us a 3, and did you say
Three and a
one
quarter.
quarter, 3 1/4?
Yeah,
I gave this, uh, I think right after I read it, without any deep analysis of it. And this was when I listened to the audiobook because I haven't righted it again yet. I was questioning some things the second time I read it. I was thinking, yeah, what about other groups who are successful or groups that actually work well together that are not? And I was just thinking of my own experiences. And I kind of felt some of it was very secret y. And what I mean is secret y, I'm talking about the book, The Secret.
yeah. It is very much like that.
I was like, yeah, there's a lot of positivity here, but I've had really great experiences with groups that were not successful. And some of the funnest experiences, or at least most enjoyable,
Yeah,
were with groups that were totally not successful.
yeah.
So,
That is most
and
certainly true.
yeah, so I was like, yeah, this is an interesting thing to look at, but it's not the whole shebang. Like there's way other ways. There's way much more ways to approach this other than these very nominal and selective groups that he um, chose to look at in this book.
Yep, I agree.
So upon second reading, I'm gonna give it a little bit higher than what you gave. I will just go ahead and put it in solidly in the 4 category because I put Talent Code, like, for me was like a little bit higher than a 4, not quite
That's fair.
5.
That's fair.
But I'm not a super harsh critic.
Well, yeah, the talent.
So
I do think that the talent code was significantly better than the culture code.
yeah, I would give it a full star rating above the culture code.
That's fair.
But yeah, I would say check it out. It's not long. You could read it in like a day or two. It's it's just a good thing to bank in your gray matter just when you're thinking over things. It's anecdotal, I'll tell you that. There's not a whole lot of really hard statistics that go into this thing. It's mostly all anecdotes. So anybody that's kind of adverse to anecdotal examples versus statistical trends may not like this. But for those who are empathetic to I guess, the story of it, which is kind of what the book is about, what's more about the story of these groups rather than the overall trends that can be spotted between success and non-success. But there you go. And I think we can end it on that. Did you have any plugs or anything you wanted to pull out there? Things you wanted people to know about?
I mean, as always, you know, go to my Patreon, Greg Ghouls in the Souls, and give me money, but nobody ever does. So
Hey, it doesn't hurt to try.
yeah, I just want people to listen to my music. So hopefully one day they will. Just got to keep
All
going.
right. All right, cool, man. Well, yeah, just check out Mixed Mental Arts. Really, we only kind of exist as a Facebook group right now. And we got this going occasionally. We got shit stored up. I don't know what's going on. We got like interviews just kind of sitting there. But I guess I'll have to figure out what's going on that end.
Yep. Oh, look at that. All right.
Will someone join?
Yeah, Andrew just joined.
Hey,
Okay, great. Well, actually, then that means I'll be on for another while, a little while more then.
All right. Well, on that note, I'm gonna take my leave then.
All right, great. Well, thanks for joining us. Have a great day, man.
Later, guys.
all
See
right,
ya.
see you guys there.
All right, so we got a switching of cast here.
Yep.
What did you think about the culture code, Andrew?
Oh, I thought it was it's a really interesting and straightforward book for basically telling you what makes an effective culture or group, which is sort of the way that culture is defined in the book in that more broad way, I would say.
Yeah, I would say if you're looking for culture as the culture we kind of talk about now, like we're talking about like racial culture or national culture, it doesn't really talk about that specifically. It's mostly talking about cultures in respect to work.
Yeah, like it talks about like Navy SEALs and Pixar and like companies and groups in that kind of way, right?
Yeah, so going into this book, just to let everyone know, this is a book about work culture. It's not a book about family cultures, religious cultures. It's specifically about work in the context of American society, because there's no really other groups that he looks at outside of this country that I can think of.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So there is some limitation in what he is looking at. He's very selective about what he's taking a look at, and it's specifically American work groups. I know there's all of the groups that he highlights revolve around work. I think the only one that does not is a school called KIPS. But if you read Talent Code, he also covers KIPS in that book also.
Oh, okay.
But
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I've actually read Talent Code.
yeah, Talent Code's really good. I actually like Talent Code more than the Culture Code.
Is that the one where they in which they analyze a lot of athletes?
Well, they try to analyze talent clusters. So when I mean talent clusters, like places that produce talent and
Okay.
what those places have in common. So I know one is the KIPP school charter school system, and it's more international. It's not solely based on U.S. work groups. He also focuses on a Russian tennis coach, and some other. It's mostly based off of coaching and coaches and um, people who cultivate talent.
Okay.
One of them was like a group of a family that had a bunch of novelists in it, and a lot of it is about how none of these people are overnight successes, and they actually really worked hard and failed quite a bit before they became a success.
That seems to at least often be the case, if not overwhelmingly so.
Yeah, so it does try to take the wind out of the sails of the idea of overnight success. And it does show that, okay, it's these people that were successful. I think the voice coach for Ashley Simpson and the voice coach for another American Idol singer. Like, yeah, these people didn't just kind of emerge. Like they've been practicing and trying to get good for years. It's not like they
Yeah.
all of a sudden just
Yeah.
started singing and bam, they have this great talent. It's
Yeah. It's
been
like
a very long process.
it's like they just became popular today. It's not like they just magically got their talent and became successful over the course of one day and they didn't put any work into it or anything like that.
Yeah, because we don't get to see their beginnings, their failures. We only get to see the fruit of their labor.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other things that they talk about in the talent code, where yeah, these people had lots of failures. They weren't like natural geniuses. Um, and he talks about all these people that no, they were not natural geniuses. They failed like a lot of us, and there's a very specific way to practice that these people have practiced. I know one of the groups he was talking about practiced less than another group and was more successful. So he also recognizes that the type of practice very much determines, and the mindset you have going into practice does not, can also affect like the amount of practice that you actually need to get somewhere.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm sure that that's also it kind of goes along with what we talk a lot about in mixed mental arts in terms of like what Hunter and Katie O'Brien talk about in the Straight A Conspiracy, for example. It's not necessarily that you should just endlessly practice the same repeated tasks over and over and over again. It's like more about a more structured practice with more of a growth mindset in mind in
Hmm.
this way that you're talking about in terms of mindset. Like you could be much more effective using doing less practice in a more strategic way than you can just practicing just for the sake of practice.
Yeah, another thing. Well, I know we're talking about the talent code at the moment, but yeah, another thing in the talent code was that practice should always be challenging, and you shouldn't really practice for repetition.
Yeah.
The most part, practicing just for repetition only really gives you muscle memory, but it doesn't really actually challenge you to increase your skill in anything.
Hmm.
Um, I know that's true for physical practice, but that's also the same for mental. Like say if you're doing writing exercises, you're not going to always choose exercises that you're comfortable with. You're going to choose things that you might find difficult.
Yeah.
Trying writing a scenario that's not easy. That's something that you're not comfortable with. And those are the types of things that build your skill, not necessarily writing about the same thing over and over again. But yeah. So when did you finish reading the Culture Code? Did you actually try reading it again, or are we going off memory here? Uh-oh, did I
Yeah.
lose you?
Yeah, sorry, I had myself muted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook on Tuesday and Wednesday. It's really
Okay.
short. It didn't take much
It
time to
is.
go through
It
it.
is
Yeah.
super short. I
Yeah.
read half the book in a couple hours.
Yeah.
It's a really short book.
Yeah, isn't it like 7 hours long in audio form or something like that?
Yeah, the book is about 240 pages. There's a lot of other filler stuff at the end, like the notes and acknowledgments and all of that stuff. But barring that, the book is 243 pages.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's super short.
Yeah, so I actually read half of it last night. I was surprised that I got through I wouldn't call it speed reading, but I was reading at less than a minute per page, which is fast for me because it takes me like 2 minutes to read a page of Robert Jordan,
Right.
and it took me like less than a minute to read. I think it's just the flow of language that Coyle uses is very straightforward and matter of fact.
Yeah.
Um, and that's typically how I can typically read nonfiction much faster than I can read fiction. It's just the way it is for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially when it's a book that's really straightforward like this in comparison to, I don't know, something like Behave, maybe, for example, that's phenomenally data driven and is much harder to read quickly.
Yeah, for sure. So I know the book's in three parts. The first part kind of focuses on building safety and how do you create safety in a group so that a group can actually, well, it's building safety that leads to vulnerability.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. That's one of the main themes that was one of my main takeaways from the book. The importance of being able to be vulnerable in a group if you want it to be successful.
Yeah, and I also know that when he means vulnerable and safety and all of those things, he means that everybody is safe to speak up
Yeah.
when they perceive that something's going wrong. Because I've definitely been in environments when nobody wants to say shit because they
Oh,
don't
yeah,
want
me
to.
too. Yeah.
They don't want to hear like the backlash
Yeah.
from the person in charge, or that the person in charge kind of you can tell when you have a good like manager or not. Good managers will always share the responsibility with you. Bad managers will always shirk responsibility, and if something goes wrong, you are at fault.
Yeah. Or even it could even be the case that a bad manager tries to micromanage everything, right?
True, they don't allow autonomy for the people that are under them. That's just I think micromanagement is it's, I, I think it comes from an insecurity that the manager doesn't believe that their employees are autonomous enough to complete their tasks.
Yeah. And I think part of that is connected to another aspect of what we were talking about in terms of how it can be a more constructive learning experience if you kind of just get dropped into something that you're maybe at least that you're mostly prepared for, you have a general idea about, but you're taking risks within that experience, like I'm having trouble thinking of examples, but being like if as a manager you give an employee that responsibility to be able to solve a problem themselves with the skills that they already have, then that can improve their abilities much more quickly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because if you're micromanaging everything, your employees are going to become reliant on that micromanagement and won't be able to make autonomous decisions. Like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the best managers I've ever had, like I'd ask them, "What should I do here?" And they'll be like, "Well, you know what you're doing. You could decide on how you think you're going to move forward with that. You don't need my
Yeah.
input."
That reminds me
Um,
of one part in the book in which they were interviewing that Navy SEAL leader, or I think he's a trainer maybe, and they were asking him which of his teams he thinks are the most successful, and he said the ones who I was hardly ever involved with at all because they learned to figure things out themselves.
mhm. And I think another example too from the book is from the Spurs basketball team. Like they would sometimes have player-led practices, and then they would do timeout huddles without the coach because they were trusted enough that they thought that they could manage themselves in some respect, the coach at least.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, and there was another thing. I think there's one thing that's kind of universal, whether a group is successful or not. That's always helpful. Is well, they were talking about how groups view each other. Oftentimes, they'll use familial language, which denotes like the closeness of a group.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, but I think majorly it would work over not working because, of course, there's always problems when you're actually working with friends and family members. I don't know why that occurs. Have you ever worked with friends or family?
Um, not.
Not extended,
Well,
like an
no, 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 no.
extended.
I have worked with friends before, and
Mhm,
yeah, I mean, it seems to me like I guess maybe it was due to maturity at the time when I've worked with friends, we could still like work better and it didn't disrupt our work. But then
mhm,
also, especially when I've done so in more recent years, it did sort of seem to help improve our work ethic because we could we could talk about stuff. Well, because of the job we were doing, because when I was doing painting, it didn't require 100% focus, so we could do that while we were talking to each other and stuff. And since we had a good relationship, it was easier to multitask in that way, if that makes sense.
mhm. Like you had a better rapport and kind of were at ease, less stressful. I know sometimes if you have someone, well, when you're working with people that you're in good rapport with, it's typically going to be less stressful
Yeah.
versus people that were all strangers and don't really have any social connection. Then yeah, it can be a little bit more stressful. But for the familial, they were like using a lot of family language. I think a lot of it um, dealt with how do you arrange workspaces, even,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
things
that was
like that.
interesting too. Who is it that they were interviewing about that? What is it? The
It
uh
was
the
a
CEO of
Pixar guy.
Yeah, I thought it might have been the Pixar guy.
It
Yeah,
was either the Pixar guy or the other dude.
I think it might
Because
have
I
been
think they
the
were
Pixar
talking
guy,
about
but
the
I'm not
Pixar
sure.
office and it looked amazing, but like the guy was like, "Yeah, we made some mistakes."
Yeah,
in
that's exactly the
introduction.
part that I was just thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Pixar guy was like, "Yeah, we could have did better," and he was like, "Oh, this place looks amazing." Like,
Yeah.
yeah, but we could have improved. But I think also too, there's the experiment that Daniel Coyle does himself with his reading group. That he took some cues from his research and employed them, and it was like a group of students that he was mentoring for writing at the end,
Oh.
very end of the book. Do you remember that part?
I don't remember that part explicitly. I
Yeah.
remember in
So
general what you're talking.
the very last part of the book, he gives a personal anecdote about a student group that he leads. It was like a writing workshop for some, I think it was for students, like school age students. And he was
Okay.
talking about how he employed some of the techniques that he learned from his research. Like before, he said that the writing groups they would just kind of sit sparsely among the classroom, and then he rearranged the seating so that they were close together in a circle.
Yeah.
Um, he let them be more autonomous. So instead of lecturing, he would ask them about things that they like and would do like follow up questions about authors that they enjoyed and things of that nature instead of trying to be an instructor to them. He
Yeah.
said that he ended up, some of these students ended up winning some awards, and one of them had like a first place award in a writing contest. So he's trying to show how some of these little techniques in his own experience actually helped him as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
But I would say the advice for this book in general is kind of limited to people in leadership positions, or people aspiring to be in a leadership position. If
Yeah,
you're
that's a
kind of
good point.
like, yeah, if you're kind of like a grunt, I'm not sure how this book will help you that much. Uh, Maybe if you are concerned, you're a grunt that's concerned about your group cohesion, possibly wants to improve your own environment,
Yeah.
that might help you. But if you're kind of a grunt, I'd say the book that would help you more is How to Make Friends and Influence People.
Oh yeah.
Um,
That's a classic.
well, that's good. I think that book is much better for one-on-one interpersonal communications, um, as opposed to group dynamics, because group dynamics is not the same. You're managing reputation amongst a bunch of individuals, and depending on how deeply satiated you are within that, because I'm the type of person, I guess I'm more introverted than extroverted. So in that case, I find I, I don't find them entirely taxing. It really depends on who I'm with. But random strangers, depending on why we are gathered, will, I find, more taxing than not, than invigorating.
Yeah, I think I
Is
have a
that?
similar perception on that as you do because I'm more introverted than not as well. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it
I think
really,
that
really depends. It depends on why we're gathered.
yeah, yeah,
Like if
like
we're gathered for a mundane reason that I don't really care for, it's going to be more taxing than invigorating. If it's like, hey, we're here to talk about some cool shit that I like to talk about, then I don't mind that at all.
you would probably sound like an extrovert if you went to Jordan Con, hey?
Oh yeah. Well, whenever I go to like nerd shit, what I call it, I'll just go up to people and I hear something crazy in a conversation. It's like, oh yeah, I remember that. Blah 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 blah. And
Yeah.
yeah, it really, really just depends on who you're with. Like if it's just like say for instance we're going out to one of my wife's friends' birthday parties,
Oh, right.
that I don't know well, I'm just gonna be yeah, just kind of sitting here, minding my own business, just waiting until things are done, and yada yada yada. Usually that's me.
Yeah.
Um, but if I'm like at a place where, say, I get invited to watch some MMA or something, I'll be like, hey, oh yeah, did you see that fight? Blah 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 blah. You know, it just really depends on what the reason for gathering is and
Yeah.
whether you're into it or not.
Yeah. Hashtag me too.
So one of the things that Isaiah brought up, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, is that the book is not about being inclusive; it's about being exclusive. Um, Me and Isaiah did kind of find a problem with this because you're not always going to be able to craft a group, nor should you, based off of specific traits. Um,
Okay.
like if we're talking about exclusivity, one of the groups that were very exclusive was the Pixar group.
Mm-hmm.
Like even if you wanted to work in their kitchen, it was extremely competitive.
Yeah.
And they look for very specific people, even in those lowly positions. So it was, it's like they're kind of excluding a lot of people. Like, how do you deal with people who don't like to be touched so much, or who are kind of introverted in such a way that, they don't input much, conversation wise? And I
Hmm.
think those people shouldn't be discounted.
Yeah, I agree. But like in terms of exclusivity, I don't remember, did that have a lot to do with some of the traits that they were selecting for?
Well, in the Pixar example, they really didn't go heavy into the details of what traits they're looking for, but they said they're very exclusive when it comes to hiring all positions. Um, of course, the Navy SEALs, those are very exclusive. 'Cause I think, what is it? There's a 67% chance of actually getting in.
Yeah, something like
So it's
that.
a little over half. There's also, okay, in the basketball team, you got to be really good and have a very good set of skills. Um, and maybe the only one that didn't apply would be the KIPS school that he briefly talks about. I know he talks about the guy that owned the restaurants, who was like a very successful restaurant owner, um, and how like one of his managers didn't comp like a piece of salmon that the lady ate. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I think so. I remember the whole section about that guy who owns those several restaurants and like this sort of much more welcoming and personally accommodating atmosphere that he was trying to cultivate in all of his restaurants.
Well, because he's trying to cultivate that for the customers and behind the scenes for the employees, it seems like.
Right.
And a lot of the employees described it working as being with a family
Right.
and how they were treated.
So,
But I think that's all is important too.
okay. So what are I'm not saying that I'm disagreeing with your and Isaiah's critique, but to flesh it out more, what would be some of the problems with this idea of exclusivity in some of these groups?
Well, the problem is Isaiah was painting the big picture that this model that's presented in the culture code does not have an exclusivity on success. And there are many other groups that contain many individuals that aren't as selective that do pretty well.
Oh,
Um,
you mean that this formula is not the only one that works?
yeah, like this formula
Okay,
is not the only formula that works to creating a successful group. I think
that's
we
true.
wanted to stress that because there's individuals that don't fit the archetype that they're looking for in this group.
Okay,
An archetype I was talking about was like the introverted that flinches when you touch them.
right.
They're not to be discounted. There's probably something we can do with those individuals that will lead to success in a group.
Like the stereotype of people on the autism spectrum who are really good at coding or some sort of really technical thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be someone autistic. It could be something that just had a traumatic life where they just don't like to be touched,
Hmm.
or someone who's had some traumatic relationships with people, not necessarily sexual, but abusive, where they just kind of been impacted in such a way where they're not very free and vulnerable to the outside world, but they're very kind of closed up. And this is kind of like what we're talking about when one of the aspects of the group building is vulnerability. Yeah, you can be vulnerable as a group, but you can't expect all the individuals within it to be like super vulnerable. That might not be something that's, um, I would say, attainable.
Is that is that explicitly the goal though, to make everyone to make everyone equally vulnerable, or at least like excessively vulnerable, or
Well,
would it
the
still
goal,
would it still be considered a success in terms of vulnerability, even if someone who is more socially awkward is able to open up a little bit, or they feel more safe doing it?
I think just the goal is to make the group feel safe. Um, the only thing I had some qualms with is that if these groups are selecting for people who already will be able to perform the vulnerability exchange without a little bit of mentoring, or perhaps some type of um, how do I say it? Like,
Practice, guidance.
yeah, guidance, practice, like specifically selecting for individuals who already have that skill set.
Oh, okay. I see
And
what
I
you mean.
feel like some of these groups do that
I see what you
instead
mean.
of instead of trying to improve upon like individuals.
I see what you mean. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Um, hmm. Well, I don't remember. Do they sort of have that mindset of vulnerability, like even even in terms of the hiring process? And if that's the case, do they take into account whether someone might be I don't know, like socially traumatized or something like that? I mean, I'm not
They
sure if they even.
don't, yeah, because if you that's one of the things we don't get to see is what is the exact criteria that these groups use to select their employees. The only thing we know is many of them said they were highly selective, but
Hmm.
they did not give us what that criteria was.
I can totally see the point that if you're selecting for people who are better at being vulnerable in the first place, you could exclude people that could be very useful to your company if we're talking about people that have bad social skills perhaps, but maybe good technical skills. But um, and I'm just wondering how much of an effect that would have, um, based on whether they take all of those factors you mentioned into account when they're hiring someone. because that I think
Yeah.
I think how that's implemented would make a huge difference one way or the other.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the questions that's not really answered in the book.
Yeah,
And what my other thing was like, what if this was a widely, um, like a large social phenomenon that was widely adopted by companies across the country? What would happen to those people who are not as open to human interaction than others? Like, because I kind of understand that part, like not being like one of the problems with me, and it's not a problem with me specifically, and it's just a critique I get from other people, not people directly to me, but people telling other people. And the other people say, "Oh yeah, they didn't want to talk to you because you look mean or something." Like, mean?
you look
I'm
mean.
not a mean person. Like, I was like, "Yeah, you're just sitting there not saying anything, so they thought you're like mean or antisocial." Like, not really.
Oh yeah,
I'm not.
I've gotten criticism of myself like that before.
Yeah, I was like, well, no, I'm not antisocial. I just If someone wants to talk to me, I'll gladly engage in conversation with them. Sometimes I don't know how to engage well, and it's not because I'm personally affronting somebody. It's just that I'm not that good at engaging random strangers in conversation.
I think
It's
that
just,
to me that seems like one thing that people who are more extroverted in particular have a lot of
Mhm.
trouble understanding about people who are more introverted in particular. This idea that if you're if you're in a group of people and you're not contributing to the conversation, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being antisocial or you don't want to, like, to the point that you don't want to be communicating with anyone in that group. It's that
Mhm.
perhaps you're just not interested in what they're talking about, or maybe you would you would contribute more to the conversation if you were interested in what they're talking about. Like, I've definitely had experiences like that before.
Yeah, some of the best like extroverts, and this is like kind of in some of the conversations that I've been in, just with groups of people in general. Like some of the best extroverts just come out and like they'll know you're listening to the conversation and then they'll flat out ask you a question about it instead
Yeah,
of asking why aren't you jumping in? They'll just say, "Hey, what do you think about
yeah,
this?" I was like, "Oh, me? Let me think about that for a little bit. I didn't know I was gonna get called on." But I think that's a valuable tool for anyone who's an extrovert. Like instead of saying, "Oh, this person doesn't like me because they're not talking to me," how about you give them a little something to chew on so that they can engage in the conversation?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
But I there are some aspects I do generally agree with the group in the book. I think vulnerability is kind of important and safety. I do think people should be safe to share concerns. I know a lot of the book did cover about how groups get together after they perform a task and they evaluate themselves. Um, they did cover how the SEALs do it in the after action reports and how heated those things could get.
Right.
But they generally feel safe in sharing what happened. Same thing when they talk about the basketball teams, that they feel safe in. And another one I think was a hockey team. Did they cover a hockey team? Um,
I don't remember. I don't think they did, but they could have, and I could just not remember.
do you watch hockey? Because you're Canadian, you must watch hockey.
No, I don't really watch any sports other than like MMA sometimes. I used to when I was a kid. Oh, it sounds like you're getting a phone call.
Yeah, hold on a second. Oh, in the
Okay.
bathroom of all places.
Okay.
Jesus. Okay, see you in a moment.
I will fill the empty space.
That's
Well,
what I'm doing.
I will fill the empty space while you're talking there. Yeah, I was thinking about how um
Was it, dude?
how you sort of could relate it back
Okay,
to
let me,
vulnerability if you're talking about how like this idea that there's this exclusivity and you might exclude people who are more socially awkward. It could be sort of an aspect of vulnerability to be okay with them not being that vulnerable and make sure and being okay with that. But I don't know, like the this point does bring up an aspect that it doesn't seem to go into that much in the book. Yeah, I don't know. I guess when I'm saying, well, to put it as a rhetorical question, until Dusty gets back, is does it qualify as vulnerable if you feel safe enough in your environment to get vulnerable with other people, but also be totally comfortable with people who might be less socially adept, um, opening up less and them having more time? Like maybe that's a good idea too. But yeah, and in terms of the different ways that these like post-action reports can get analyzed in terms of the way that the Navy SEALs look at them, that's interesting too. How many different ways it can be analyzed. You back there, Dusty?
Yeah, I just finished that phone call. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Yeah, and then the toilet sound, that was great.
Yeah,
What were we talking about? Oh, just kind of like just the after action reports and how they get together and discuss mistakes that they've made. Um, did you talk about how Pixar they have that brain trust thing
no, I didn't.
where they'll completely tear a movie apart? Um, they give criticism, but they don't tell them what they can add. They just tell them if something is bad.
Right.
So they do stress how in these groups how that is an important process of being able to improve is to be able to criticize what they've been doing in an open and honest way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And
Yeah, and then
that's related back to vulnerability too in a way, because that means you have to be vulnerable, you have to be comfortable with being vulnerable enough to handle harsh criticism of your work without any constructive criticism of what you can do to improve it in the
yeah,
example you used. Yeah.
yeah, because this also reminds me of a lecture that Brandon Sanderson gave when he talks about like when he goes to his various writing groups, is that if someone gives you criticism, you never defend yourself. You just write down what they say and kind of nod and not give justification or defending, or you do not defend what you do.
Wow, that takes a hell of a lot of fucking vulnerability. I don't know if I could do that.
Well, that's what Sanderson says. If you go to a writing workshop and you receive criticism, just nod and that's it. You don't defend yourself. You just take it in. I think that's probably part of the group dynamic that makes it work, right?
Yeah. That sounds really challenging to do.
Well, imagine how bad things can get when you're just defending your decisions all the time. And you can come to the next group and still, it could still be there. He said eventually, like if you do not change what they tell you to change, they'll just stop talking about it in subsequent groups. and they'll look for different things to criticize.
Okay.
But yeah, that's what he said. Just kind of take it in. Don't defend yourself. You're not there to defend yourself. You're there just to see what other people think about it.
That's certainly a good goal to aspire to.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Yeah, like a lot of worthwhile goals, they sound challenging to achieve.
Yeah. So I don't know. I've been I've been searching groups, like checking out alternate communities and seeing how they operate. And I just joined this group called it's a Facebook group, and I wanted to see what people are talking about in the fantasy writing world. So it's a group about aspiring fantasy writers, and in the group, a lot of them's like, oh yeah, there's no like you don't give extremely negative criticism. This is just here for other writers to help each other. I was like, oh, this is an interesting place. And you get to see like a lot of little writing snippets that people post from whatever they're working on. And you're like, oh wow, this is like really cool that they're all sharing their art with each other. And it's interesting seeing people in that vulnerable place where they're allowing themselves to share their creations. There are some people that are very apprehensive because they fear they're going to be just taken down. So they're not really going to share because of that fear. But it's also good to know that if you do participate in these groups, that you shouldn't take any criticism personally.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and
Um,
that can be really hard with writing because you can easily personally identify it because you've spent so much time and poured so much of yourself into what you have written.
mhm. Yeah, I agree. And I think that goes for like anything where you pour a lot of your time in, like a director for a movie, um, somebody who makes video games, even, a lot of time intensive tasks where the end product comes out and nobody sees what type of labor went into that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that can be hurtful, but then again, it's going to happen and you got to be prepared for it.
That relates back to this idea that we were talking about earlier of this idea or sort of this myth really of overnight success. Like in the same
Hmm.
way, you don't see all the work that goes into that when that happens. Like you were just saying, you don't see all the work that goes into some writing that someone has created or anything else, any other creative project that someone has worked on. You just see the end result, and then you're critiquing the end result without knowing like what was going through someone's mind when they produce this specific aspect of whatever you're criticizing about their creative project.
Yeah, like you shouldn't be super harsh on somebody, especially that's just getting into a field. Um, like I know I gave like a semi-scathing review of Terry Goodkind, but Terry Goodkind's not really hurting in popularity or anything of that nature. Like
Hmm.
he's a bestseller, New York Times bestseller. He's sold millions of copies. Like my little scathing review is not really going to do anything to him in the long run. He's never going to read it. People who love the book most likely aren't going to read my review. But
Right.
if it was like someone just getting into it, like their first foray, I definitely wouldn't be that harsh. Like technically, that is his first book that he wrote that I reviewed, and I wasn't super harsh. I was comically harsh, but I wasn't like, oh, Terry Goodkind's stupid and as I feel like retarded. I was just like,
I don't remember whether I read your review or not. I think I might have, and if I did, I don't remember it being like offensive or anything like that.
Yeah, I just basically wrote that his characters seem robotic, and I did give him props for one of his characters, so it's not like I didn't find any pros in story. Um, and that's basically it. It's like the only real problem I had with the book was the tone and some of the character dialogue. And why I say tone is because it has a confusing tone. Um, like the reason why the rape scenes and the weird sexual makeout scenes are jarring is because the tone of the book doesn't fit.
The
Like,
weirdest part of that book, and sorry to interrupt,
no, go ahead.
the weirdest part of that book for me in terms of what you're describing was that torture scene, like 3/4 of
Oh,
the
the
way
100
into the
page.
book. There's that whole long torture sequence. I found that like that was one of my favorite parts in terms of it being interesting, but
Hmm.
the like what happened leading up to that and then what happened after, especially in terms of his interaction with that character afterward, I found kind of confusing.
I
Do you know
didn't find the torture scene that confusing.
I mean what happened after it?
Um, yeah, I think the way that arc ended, I it made sense because according to the character, she couldn't really remove the magic, and the only way to do so would for she had to die. And I think there were things that Richard did that softened her heart, and she did talk about those things.
Okay.
And ultimately,
I clearly don't remember anywhere near enough of the details to be justifying
yeah,
things that
because
I
she's
said.
basically my favorite character in that book. The one who tortures Richard.
Right.
She seems like the most human person out of everybody in that book. Um, More so than the main villain, because she kind of has like a tragic ending, and she kind of was just a cog in the machine and was conditioned to be a torturer. And the things she had to do to achieve her position were horrendous.
Yeah,
And they
definitely.
were horrendous on many levels, specifically because she had to be tortured, and then she had to witness the torture of her family members to become a Mord Sith.
Right. Okay. I had
And
forgotten all of that because it was years ago that I read this book, like I said.
yeah, and she
Yeah,
wasn't exactly free to choose.
right.
She was basically put in the same position that Richard was put in. So it's kind of like I liked it because it shows like the cycle of abuse. Like she became an abuser because she was abused. And I kind of like that aspect that he was trying to focus on there.
Yeah,
But
that's one of the reasons why I found that to be one of the most interesting parts of the book, even though
yeah,
it's
I
also
think that's the best character in the book. Everything revolving around the Mord Sith is like the best that the book offers. Not to say that everything else is horrible, but I would say that that character is like the high point of the book.
right.
As far as the tone, what I mean by the tone is that when I read Game of Thrones and there's like horrendous, weird shit and sexual assault and all that other stuff, like the
Yeah.
tone merits that in the book, but I feel like the tone of Wizard's First Rule doesn't, because on first when you're reading it, it seems like a young adult fantasy book.
Then
Nobody's
it gets
swearing.
dark.
Yeah, because like nobody's swearing, nobody's using like bad language, like the characters aren't rough and gruff. Um, they're kind of like somewhat wholesome. and then it kind of goes like, Jesus, what's going on here? That's what I mean by the tone just seems way off
I see.
in the book. Like it doesn't adequately prepare you for that. And that's kind of what I mean. It's like, okay, you see these wholesome characters interacting. Oh yeah, they're calling each other friend. They're acting like super moral people, and then bam, uh, little girl gets her face kicked in. It's like, Jesus, what's
Well,
on in this book?
that could be deliberate to make it more effective.
Yeah, but just
I
the
don't know
tone
that
is just weird. It just like if you
I
look
don't
like
I
if
don't
we
remember
read Game of Thrones,
I don't remember the book well enough to make any arguments one way or the other about the tone. So I'll assume that you're probably accurate.
no, I'd say revisit. Like
Yeah,
it's like when you read Game of Thrones, you have an expectation of it. When you read that book, you don't.
right.
And it's because the world it builds in the beginning seems more like a young adult book rather than an adult fantasy book.
Yeah.
So your expectations are kind of shattered, not in a good way, in a storyful way, but in a way that the tone just doesn't fit.
Okay. Yeah, I
Like,
mean, I don't. I mean, like I said, I'd have to revisit the book to say what I think because it's that could be that could be a fairly subjective aspect of what you think about how the tone changes and how it fits to you too. And I mean, I remember I'm
well, it's like
not sure.
here's what I think. It's not this drastic, but imagine if you're watching a Harry Potter movie and then halfway through the Harry Potter movie, Harry Potter gets tortured by a dominatrix.
Yes.
I think that's the only way I can really describe what I mean by the tone is off.
Okay. Yeah, that would that would be strange.
That's just what I feel like when I'm reading this book. I don't know if it's completely accurate, but I feel like that aspect, like that, I think those things don't mesh together very well in the book.
Okay.
Like if he
I was
was going for grimdark straight up, then
Mhm.
yeah, go ahead. But it seems like the tone is a little confused in the book.
I was just thinking about like how like sometimes I think I was watching like a Daniel Green video about this maybe about how he was talking about how some young adult books are written with the idea in mind of them being published as young adult books, and then with
Mm-hmm.
other ones they're not written with that in mind, but they get slapped with that label later on,
Mm-hmm.
which is perhaps why some books can start off seeming like they're young adult and then they can get really fucking dark, but
Mm-hmm.
that sounds different from what you're describing though.
Yeah, yeah. Like I understand that series can go darker. Like they can start out light and then get progressively darker. Like I think I haven't read Harry Potter, but I believe it goes in that direction. Am I right?
You haven't read
Like
Harry
the
Potter?
subject? No, I
What
haven't.
is wrong with you? Jeez. I'm not
I'm working on it, man. I'm working on it.
I don't think they're if I re I've actually been thinking about rereading them lately, and I think that I probably wouldn't like them as much because a lot of the when I was reading them, they happened especially when I think the fourth book when that one came out, that was the first one that I got as soon as it came out, and those
Hmm.
all of those books were a very large part of my childhood and my upbringing. Like my parents used to read the first few of them to my brother and I when we were not quite old enough to read ourselves, and then they were some of the first books that we started reading on our own, and then we would excitedly wait for each new book to come out. So that definitely affects the way I view them a lot. Like they're in terms of in terms of what I think about novels in general today. there are definitely other novels that I like way more than the Harry Potter series.
Well, I don't have any compunction about revisiting kids or young adult novels. Like I
Oh
know,
yeah, me neither. Yeah.
like last year or a couple of years ago, I read a novel that's like considered to be a third or fourth grade staple, which is Island of the Blue Dolphins.
Oh,
And I
okay.
read it, and it's still an actual good story. It's
Yeah.
not
Some
overly.
some young adult
Yeah.
fiction is really good too. Like I've also been wanting to reread and read some books that I read when I was younger, or some young adult ones that I haven't read yet. Like I was hearing from Daniel Green too that I think more of the more of the books in the His Dark Materials series are going to come out.
Hmm.
And I actually reread those a few years ago, and I actually liked them more than when I read those books when I was a kid, because I understood more detail of what was really happening in the plot. And then also apparently a new one of those books is coming out in the series. I forget what the series is called, but they're by Kenneth Okel, and they're from the perspective of bats. And I read those when I was a kid too. There's Silver, Sunwing, and Firewing are the first three, and apparently more of those are coming out. And then also the other day, I took out from the library that book Aragon, which is in that Inheritance Cycle series, I think it's called, because
Yeah, the
I
kid.
haven't read
It was
those.
written by a kid, right?
Oh, what were they? I didn't know that.
I think he was a teenager when he wrote the first book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's like Terry Brooks. He wrote the first Shannara book when he was in high school.
Well, he started it when he was in high school, but I think he completed it when he was 23.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was in college when he published, or right out of college when he published, but he had been working on that for a while.
Right. Okay.
In the case of Christian, he actually published it while still a teenager.
Oh, Christian Paolini?
There you go. I always have trouble with those Italian names.
I don't know if that's actually how you pronounce it.
um, but yeah, it looks like we jumped in from culture code to what we read this week.
Yeah, kind of, right.
Um, yeah, and I think we could just talk about the last aspect. Well, the culture code is a very short book,
It
so
is.
there's not a whole lot to cover in it. The basic tenets are here are some anecdotes about some groups that work well with each other. Here's what they have in common, and here's how we define their success and their goals.
Yeah.
In total, there's quite a few groups. I guess we have the SEALs, we got the jewelry thieves,
Yeah,
the
that
Pink
part was interesting.
Panthers,
Yeah.
which they're like, oh, they got to be these Serbian special forces, and it turns out they're just like working in middle class people that have nothing to do with the military.
Yeah.
Um, there was the coach of the Spurs. There was the guy who owned, I think, 25 successful restaurants. All but one of them failed. Um, and there were like some other groups, but I think the moral of the story is don't be authoritarian in your groups. Let people share stuff, share criticism. Let them feel welcome to share criticism, and let them feel like they're part of some type of a family.
Right.
So all positive stuff, positive. It's all framed in a positive way so that people can interact with each other and maintain physical closeness. It's one of the tenets too, with
Yeah.
how you arrange your office space. Of course, there's going to be, this is very hard to apply to online groups because there's no physical proximity to people. It's
Yeah.
just talking, but there's definitely other things that we could employ, like the vulnerability aspects. That's definitely can be employed, and the familial aspect. That's something that can be employed as well. So
Yeah.
at least there are some parts that can be employed in online groups and communities. But that's basically, I guess, why they're more difficult to wrangle because they're
Yeah.
not in close proximity. People who anonymize themselves will actually remove themselves from being vulnerable.
Yeah.
So we kind of have, if you just look at the zeitgeist of internet and Twitter and things in general where people are anonymous, you can kind of see how this breaks down and actually causes all kinds of chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. To say the least.
Oh, yeah. So, did you have any more points that you want to discuss about the culture code?
No, I think we discussed pretty much everything I was thinking about it in terms of my main takeaways. That's a really interesting criticism of yours and Isaiah's too.
Yeah, it's not the end all or be all of forming groups. I think that's just an option you should consider, but there's probably more options that are available that aren't really discussed in the book.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I guess we could jump back into our what did we read this week
Yeah.
after wrapping up the culture code portion of that. So I know you were talking. I saw that you started, yeah, that first book of the inheritance cycle.
Yeah, actually, I was looking for I was looking in my library for a novel a novel audiobook to listen to, and
Hmm.
I kept looking up ones that I had put on my list and not finding them, and
Hmm.
so I finally and then when I found one in the library that was one that I wanted to read, it would be out, so I'd have to put it on hold. So I eventually just went to Aragon because that was my like 10th option or something like that. But I switched that back from currently reading to want to read on my Goodreads app because I um, I, t- I returned it to the library before I actually started reading it because I remembered, oh, a lot of these books that are not available in my library, a lot of the times there's actually a pretty good selection on YouTube of audiobooks. So so I returned that book, and and then on YouTube I just found a free audio version of The Blade itself, the first one in the First Law trilogy.
Oh.
So I'm listening to that one now instead. And then yesterday, the day I started reading The Blade itself, I saw that I only had to wait one day for whoever was reading it in my library to be done with The Hero of Ages. So I'm gonna listen to that as soon as I'm done The Blade itself too, especially since The Blade itself is really short. It's only like an 11 or 12-hour long audiobook.
So, one question I have. You said you found the blade itself on YouTube?
Yeah, and
Oh.
the second
Oh.
book in this series is on there too.
Hmm. I love how was you? Oh, okay. The only thing that's a little bit inconvenient about YouTube is that if you turn your phone screen off, you can't listen to it.
Yeah, I know. I'm like
Yeah.
I'm unusual. I think I'm unusual in comparison to most people in that most of the time when I'm watching or listening to something, I'm at home, so I just use my Wi-Fi anyway. So it doesn't matter if I'm like not looking at the screen. Well, especially if it's just an audiobook. It just drains your
Yeah.
battery faster.
Yeah, and I think the other problem I have too is stopping and starting and
Yeah, you have to.
making.
Well, does your YouTube app not save your place on videos if you stop listening to it and listen to a different one or watch a different one?
It does sometimes, sometimes it doesn't, and I switch devices often.
Okay.
So that and because the audiobooks are all in one gigantic track in the YouTube videos, usually when you want to rewind something to listen to it again, it's a little difficult.
Oh, okay. I guess it sort of always sort of bookmarks my place in a video on YouTube. I guess because I'm almost always only using YouTube on my phone.
If I was able just to purely to listen to YouTube, I think that would work for me. It's just my phone screen being on, and then I gotta walk around with the phone being, and if I press the wrong thing, the thing skips ahead while the phone's in my pocket.
Right.
So that's like one of the problems it causes me. But the Blade itself, I think I'll be getting the audiobook in a couple weeks anyway.
Cool.
I'm just waiting.
I really
to
like
check
it.
out.
I really like it a lot already, even though I've only listened to the first few hours. It's really got that grim dark aspect that I already knew was going to be in there, and it like starts off in the middle of a fight scene, and it's really violent, which I like. So yeah, it's good.
See, they said it sounds like the tone is set right away in that book.
Yeah, it is. They just drop you right into the middle of a fight and like the grim thoughts that the characters are having and the grim way that the characters are.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna get to listen to that in a few weeks. I'm looking forward
Cool.
to it. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I have a lot of stuff. Right now, currently out, I have Foundation,
Right.
and the last book in the Malorian.
Is that the David Eddings series?
Yeah, so that's like book 10,
Oh,
basically.
okay. Oh,
Um, all the books are pretty short, though. They typically don't go over 15 hours audiobook wise. But this one so far is okay. Like, to be honest, if you're not a fan of the first series, I don't think there's any point really of reading the second series.
okay.
It's like, yeah, if you're a fan of it and you just like want to have more of it, then that's fine. But the second series is kind of almost a rehash of the first series. It's
Oh, okay.
not very different. Like you don't meet that many new characters, and it's kind of more of the same. It's not super exciting or anything.
Oh, okay. I haven't read any of those, but I probably will eventually, I would say.
Yeah,
I'm
they're pretty standard and tropey. Like there's nothing. If you're a avid fantasy reader, they stick to tropes, but a thing I like about it is it's somewhat humorous. It's not over the top comedy, but I like some of the more humorous one-liners and dialogue. I enjoy that part
okay.
of it.
I'm looking forward to listening to Hero of Ages. That should be really
Yeah,
good.
the conclusion to
Yeah.
the Mistborn Era One. Well, I wouldn't call it the exact conclusion because there's also Secret History, which takes place in Era One. You should only read that after you read the first trilogy because it's very relevant to it.
Oh, remind me to do that once I'm done book 3.
Yeah,
I mean,
Secret History is like really shocking once you find out what it's actually about. You're
oh,
like,
okay.
this is what it's about? This is crazy. So
Oh,
I'm not
that's
even going
cool.
to tell you what the hell it's about.
Good. Don't tell me.
I can't
Yeah.
even tell you what characters are in it. I can't tell you because if I name one character, it kind of blows the whole story out of the water. It's like, how can it be about that character? That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Or how like there's a bunch of characters. It's like weird. You're gonna have to check it out. It's like kind of ties the different because I think they talk about different. What do they talk about? Well, I don't want to spoil it. It's just hard not to spoil it if you talk about it. So I'm just gonna leave it at
Okay.
that. But
Yeah.
yeah, Hero of Ages, excellent book.
Yeah. The in the second cycle, it's just labeled as book 4 in the same series when I see that it's available in my library.
Book 4.
Yeah,
Which
it's
book?
just I think it must be the first one in the like in the next series, like in the next era that you've described it, because it sort of moves forward in
Oh
history.
yeah, Secret
Yeah.
History is like it's a side story,
Yeah,
but
I
it's
get that.
pretty important though. It's because it's actually a novella that he written that's part of one of his collections. You can find it in Arcanum Unbound, which has a lot of his short stories in. Um, and there's a lot of cool short stories in Arcanum Unbounded. And you could also find, I found it as a standalone at my library, but if that's not available, as I was like, okay, this one's not available in audiobook. Let me see if it's in Arcanum Unbound. And I found it in Arcanum Unbound. And it has the audiobook version in that story collection.
Oh, okay.
But
I'm
yeah, it's definitely
also,
worth a read after you're done with the third book.
yeah, I bet it is. I'm also reading some philosophy books for preparation for more conversations that I'm going to do soon with Chief Keef, as I decided that he's named now due to your influence, aka
Yeah.
Keef, and Shane Kennedy will participate in more of those, and I'm going to talk with Hayden too. We're going to do more videos in our series that we started on postmodern theology with Chief Keef, and I think Shane will probably participate in a lot of those, which is interesting because we're continuing to bring in a Christian and huge Jordan Peterson fan to discussions about postmodernism. So that's fun. And you have people that you need to talk to there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello.
I will fill in the empty space then. Well, I'll just keep talking about what I was reading. Yeah, and what we're doing next. We're also oh yeah, I finished reading the which one is it? Oh yeah, The Consequences of Pragmatism by Richard Rorty, which is really interesting because it talks about, it goes into pragmatism from sort of outside of the perspective of pragmatism. I'm not sure if Richard Rorty really, if he is a pragmatist, although he sometimes is labeled that
I don't
way,
know what they
and
did with the other forms.
a lot of pragmatists don't like him because I think they seem to think that he sort of misrepresents pragmatism, and but it's interesting because he looks at those theories in general and compares them to other completely different types of theories. Like he looks at Wittgenstein's theory of language and then compares it to Derrida's theory of language. So he's like comparing um, whatever type of philosopher Wittgenstein would be labeled as, I'm not sure, to sort of a more postmodernist theory on language, and coming to a totally different conclusion about that. And then also the first episode, we finished last the last essay that we hadn't gone through in the Cambridge Companion of Postmodernism that we were covering through podcast. And oh, I forgot to mention that we're going to do a series on Richard Rorty and pragmatism for Hayden's podcast, Pragmatic Christian. Hayden, Bruce, Chief Keef, and I, and then yeah, I mentioned that we went through the essay, which was actually on post religion in the Cambridge Companion of Postmodernism. So now I'm reading the Cambridge Companion of Postmodern Theology in preparation for more chats that we're going to do about postmodern theology. So I've been reading a lot of philosophy, mostly a lot of philosophy and a lot of fantasy lately. So, are you back there, Dusty? Guess not yet. Okay. What else? I think I was going to. Oh yeah, I was also going to read soon this book called Space Cadet, which is the one I've talked about before. It's in this series called Heinlein's Juveniles, which is an unofficial series of books from Robert Heinlein, Robert A. Heinlein, who wrote Stranger in a Strange Land. Of course, that's one of his most famous novels. And then he also wrote Starship Troopers, which got made into a movie that a lot of people don't like, partially because it was only very loosely based on the book, because the director didn't even read the entire book. But this series is a series of young adult novels, which were some of the earliest ones written by Robert Heinlein, and they're I think I was saying before that they're sort of loosely connected because they take place in basically the same universe, and some aspects of this universe in which this unofficial series takes place connected to other different universes that Robert Heinlein created in different series in sort of a loose way. Like there are a lot of differences, but then there are a few similarities between the different types of universe in this Heinlein's Juveniles series in comparison to his other series. So it's interesting in that way, because it's kind of like Isaac Asimov's work too, in which his robot series like iRobot and his Foundation series sort of take place in the same universe, and then he has other books that take place in completely different universes, and then some universes that seem like they have some similarities and some differences to the Robot slash Foundation series. So that's an interesting aspect of that
What about you, robot?
series. What about you, Robot? I don't know.
Yeah,
Am I a robot? I didn't even know. Maybe I am. Never.
you, robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just checking some people in here,
Okay.
which is unusual for a Saturday evening, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so your philosophy with Chief Keef. I did catch some of that postmodern. It was like you guys were reviewing an essay about postmodern theology or something like that.
Yeah, that's what we did
Yeah.
on our last episode, which is our first episode on postmodern theology, and we're going to do a series on that based on the book, The Cambridge Companion to Postmodern Theology. So that'll be really
Oh,
interesting to go through. Like, I'm already noticing that it's really interesting, because well, as you realize, the more you learn about postmodernism, it's sort of hard to nail down exactly what it is, especially in terms of whether you're talking about postmodernism as a philosophy, or as a type of art or literary criticism, or as
hmm
an era of history, or as sort of a sociological condition. But you can create something like postmodern theology specifically because it's so like vague and hard to identify, and it's sort of about looking at theological definitions, like even the idea of God, as less rigid and more mysterious and open to change, which is interesting because it sort of fits really well with Shane's theology, because he's an Orthodox Christian, and at least the way that he practices his religion, there he likes to incorporate a hell of a lot of mystery into theological ideas, like the idea of God too. So that's an interesting matchup there.
What about Hayden Bruce Christian?
Hayden
Hayden
Bruce,
Christian.
pragmatic Christian. Yeah, we were
What
going.
is Hayden Bruce Christian's name? Is that how it goes?
His name is Hayden Bruce. His podcast is Pragmatic Christian.
Oh, I
I think
thought
we
he
could.
had three names. Didn't he have like a middle name or something?
Oh yeah, I think on Facebook he's Hayden Samuel Bruce. That's his middle name.
I'm confused. I don't know which is his first name and which is his
His
last
first
name.
name his first name is Hayden, and his last name is Bruce.
Okay.
He has like two, like it sounds like he has two first names.
Okay, Hayden. I thought Christian was part of his name, but I guess
No.
I'm incorrect.
No. No. But
Okay.
I think he considers himself a pragmatic Christian because he tries to apply philosophical pragmatism to religion. And so I've been reading. I just finished reading The Consequences of Pragmatism by Richard Rorty to do some episodes on Hayden's podcast with Chief Keef about Richard Rorty, who, as I was saying, is sort of a pragmatist, but a lot of pragmatists hate him because he criticizes pragmatism and sort of misrepresents it. But once you actually read Rorty after reading criticisms of him, Hayden was saying that you sort of understand that he's trying to play around with terms a little bit and be sort of provocative. And he's looking at a lot of different ideas from different angles and incorporating like Wittgenstein and Derrida. And so he's applying like postmodernism to that too, and then whatever Wittgenstein would be classified as, and looking at Wittgenstein's theory of language in comparison to Derrida's theory of language. And that was one of the takeaways from that book that I found the most interesting. This
So,
idea that you can't really have a rigidly defined theory of how language works in general. You can just have like really good ideas. So there isn't like this there we can't reach this rigid sort of foundational way of looking at language, which is that it's interesting too, because that's an idea that Wittgenstein arrived at later in life, and it's different from his earlier theory of language that was more of the idea that we can say in general it's referential, which is sort of the idea that Derrida incorporates too. So he's critical of that idea of Derrida, which I think is interesting. Although Derrida sort of changed his mind and was a little closer to that too, if I remember correctly. It's really complex and hard to keep all the details straight.
I think someone told me that I would like Wittgenstein. I don't know why they told me that, but he's like kind of one of those language people, right?
Yeah, and he's really analytical, and he applies his philosophy to theology too, like a lot of people did around that era. So he has some interesting ideas about other sort of philosophical ideas in general, and about theology and about language. And he's very analytical because if I remember correctly, he was either trained as an engineer or a mathematician, and then he switched majors to philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting switch up.
Yeah, I know, right? That has happened with like at least a few, or maybe even a handful that I know of. So maybe a lot more famous philosophers in history, particularly analytical ones, who started off in
Yeah.
more scientific, technical fields and then moved to philosophy. I think John Dewey might be one of those too.
Was
But
that the guy that talked to Sam Harris and had an argument about his Sam Harris's scientific morality deal?
no, John Dewey was a famous pragmatist philosopher, one of the first ones, along with Charles Peirce and William James.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
not sure. I'm not sure who specifically you're talking about in terms of Sam Harris. I was thinking.
Someone posted a video of Sam Harris talking to like a guy who's a scientist, I think, and he also is well versed in philosophy. But they were talking about how Harris's model for morality through science is
Yeah,
dumb or
science
something like
can.
that.
Oh, okay. I should look for that episode because I have the same sort of criticisms as a lot of people do of his theory
Yeah,
that
so
supposedly science can give us objective moral values, which really is ridiculous in my opinion.
yeah, so I think someone did post that video in Mixed Martial Arts. I don't know if it was a couple weeks ago, but it was kind of like a really good spot on conversation about why Sam Harris's book is so weak and that it attributes a subjective value to consciousness. Because that's the
So
whole basis of.
this was an episode of Sam Harris's podcast in which a philosopher came on and criticized those ideas.
I don't know if it's an episode of his podcast. What I do know is there's a video of a segment of it because it looks like it was a live one of his live events
Okay.
where they're kind of sitting in a theater and he's talking to them on stage. But I know that the guy had really good counters to like Sam Harris's notion because a lot of the basis of Sam Harris's notion is that there's some type of moral value to consciousness, and
Oh, I didn't remember
the
that.
thing is, yeah, and the thing is, it's like how would science even attempt to attribute a moral value to consciousness? That just doesn't
Yeah.
make sense to the scientists.
And it is like,
Um,
if you look at like Jonathan Haidt, for example, explains how morality is sort of like an evolved psychological phenomenon among humans. Like it's this, like we have this built-in sense of morality in our brains. So how can we trust like our evolved subjective psychology to be able to tell us that what we think morally is actually true? If we think there's a moral value to consciousness, how do we know that evolution didn't just like program us to think that in order to adapt to our environments to survive better?
yeah, that's a good question, and I know I just don't. I just think science is not. Science is just observation. It's nothing but observation. And I
Yeah,
think in the conversation, like I think the thing that they have an issue is the whole is and ought thing. I know it's probably some ancient thing that philosophers argue over. I don't
I
really
think it's
understand it all that much.
I think when Sam Harris is referring to that, I think he's rejecting Bertrand Russell's distinction between is and ought, and is and ought. Yeah, because Bertrand Russell makes that distinction, oddly enough, as an atheist philosopher who were less popular at the time. He made that is ought distinction in defense of atheism and against religion, which I think is interesting because Sam Harris is rejecting the is ought this distinction uh, that Bertrand Russell made in order to criticize religion. And when he makes that is ought distinction, it's based on his own subjective interpretations and moral values that there it that what we say when we say something is, when we're describing a fact, that this fact is a value. Like water is composed of hydrogen and oxygen. Like how is that a moral fact? That doesn't
Hmm.
really make sense.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think as well. It doesn't make sense because the presupposition that Harris um, comes from is that he ascribes some site because of the existence of consciousness. He ascribes some type of morality to that because it
Yeah.
exists. And I'm not. Okay, I actually found who the debate was with. It was Sam Harris and Sean Carroll.
Oh, the physicist. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I have heard that episode actually. Now that you mention it, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I
that's
should,
what I
I
meant
should
by it
listen
was
to
like a
that one again.
scientist guy he was talking to. And the scientist guy kind of sounds like he was schooling Sam in his own field.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it was Sam's fake, I guess it's the philosophy of Sam Harris. It just, I don't know, never made
It's like
sense to me.
like a scientist is better at scientism than a philosopher who is a scientismist or whatever you would call them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I think his whole objection was scientific morality. The scientist doesn't just was like, no,
Yeah,
And it's funny because no matter what, Sam is going to have to defend that idea to the death because he wrote a book about it.
And it sounds it almost sounds like an oddly religious way of looking at the world too. Like
That's
why would
funny because
like
Sean Carroll said the same thing.
yeah, like why did the big if you're ascribing moral value to the Big Bang happening and the universe being created, doesn't that sound really similar to saying like God created the universe for a purpose?
Mm, yeah, I don't get why Sam Harris was entertaining this or ever wanted to entertain it. I think it had the motivation what more had to do with his anti-theism than it had to do
Yeah.
with the actual philosophy that he was coming up. I think he was trying to come up with an alternate to religion,
Yeah,
but I
because
don't know what the hell he
yeah,
really was trying to do. It just
well,
doesn't.
it's like his idea that religion should not give us moral values because religion is bad. So we should get our moral values from science because that makes more sense.
Yeah, but that doesn't make sense at all.
No, it doesn't.
Moral values from science, like how doesn't science inform morality? Like I don't. Science only gives you data. It doesn't tell you what's right and wrong.
Yeah, like science is descriptive, it's not prescriptive, or
Yeah,
however you
it
say
just
that
tells
word.
you. It tells you what things are, but not whether they're good or bad.
Yeah,
Like yes, science can figure out if a chemical is detrimental to you, but the chemical, like say ayahuasca, is probably like immoral in some cultures and moral in some.
yeah,
Like, it doesn't matter. There's no scientific moral prescription that says ayahuasca is good or bad. It only tells you that ayahuasca exists.
and Darwinism can get carried away and go into something like eugenics if you think that the way people evolved, there's a moral reason for that. Therefore, we should like sterilize people so we can get this genetically superior race.
Yeah, that's when things get sticky. When you try to moralize science,
Yeah,
that should not be a thing. I don't know why Sam is even engaging in that,
because he's all about scientism.
but even though he may not even say it, that he certainly is.
Yeah. He's also he never calls himself this, but I think he's really a logical positivist, which is a branch of philosophy that pragmatists often talk about, which is basically these philosophers who did exactly what Sam Harris is doing. They said that science can tell us everything, basically, and it should be applied to everything.
Yeah, that basically sounds like Sam Harris.
Yeah.
Dang, we got really out of left field there.
Yeah.
I didn't even say what I was reading. I know we covered that I read Wizard's First Rule.
Yeah.
I read in a review. I gave it 2 stars.
Oh,
It's not horrible, but I'd say give it a shot because it's weird. In that I never read a book that didn't have that had the same tone matching issues that this one did. Um, I thought it was an interesting experience. I thought there are some actual originality that does come into this book. There's a lot of borrowing. You can see that. There's borrowing from Robert Jordan. There's borrowing from you name it. But
Tolkien, of course.
Tolkien, everybody borrows from Tolkien.
Yeah.
The wizard in the wizard's first rule was basically Gandalf.
Yeah.
That's the same archetype.
Well, it's like how
And there's
Moraine.
also
It's like how
yeah,
Moraine is Gandalf in the Eye of the World.
yeah, and there's also a Gollum archetype in the book
Oh, I
named
didn't remember
Samuel.
that.
Yeah, it's one of the witch's minions. Name is Samuel. He was the former seeker, And the Seeker sword, Sword of Truth, turns you into a golem type creature if you don't know how to handle the magic.
Oh, that sounds like Wheel of Time too.
Yeah, a little bit.
Like like Kalendor.
Yeah, except you
Although
don't
it
turn into
doesn't,
golem. It doesn't
yeah,
turn anyone to golem though.
yeah, like more of a much more of a physical manifestation of those consequences.
Well, the Sword of Truth is basically from Shannara Chronicles, because that's what the power of the sword is it tells you the truth of reality. I don't know. Sword of Truth in this book, it just makes you mad. That's as far as I can tell. When you use
Hey,
it, it makes you pissed, like really pissed off.
hey, you saw that you saw that Daniel Green video with that debate with, well, not debate, but discussion with him and Craig from Legendarium, and
Mm.
I think he asked Craig what he thinks the
The
or
worst adaptation
yeah,
is?
yeah, and he said the Shannara series. What did you think about that? Have you already
Um,
told me what your
I think
thoughts
there's
in
worse
general?
ones.
Okay.
Like, I think technically there are worse ones. Like, I think the worst one I've ever seen was the rotoscope Lord of the Rings.
Oh,
Um, that one just. And there's probably another worse one. I know there was a Dragonlance cartoon that's pretty bad.
oh, okay. I saw
um,
when I was a kid, I don't even remember what it was called, but I saw this movie adaptation of Dungeons and Dragons, and I remember even as a kid, I thought that one was terrible. Even though actually no, I'm pretty sure I did read a few Dungeons and Dragons novels when I was a kid, and I remember thinking even back then, wow, this movie's terrible.
well, that's more of an adaptation of a game than it is like a fantasy novel series.
Yeah, that's true. I never
So,
really played the game.
yeah, the story could be anything, literally.
Okay.
Like the person running the game can make the story up.
Oh, okay.
Um, but I would say Shannara, the series, did have its problems. I didn't get through the whole thing, and he is correct. They take books from characters from different books, like book three, and they put them into book two. And the weird thing about the Shannara books is like each of the books takes place like 40 years, 40 to 50 years. So it's kind of jarring to have
You mean there's 40 to 50 years in between each book
between
or
each
each?
book, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Between
Okay.
each book, there's 40 to 50 years. And when you include characters from other books, you're like, yeah, these characters wouldn't have met each other ever.
Oh, okay.
And it kind of ruins that story for that character when they actually tackle the story, if they actually tackle the story of the next book, because that character is like a main character. So it's they totally screwed around with that, and they kind of screwed around with the teenage angst.
Right. Yeah, I
Uh,
remember you telling me about that.
that's not at all a focus in the book. Um, and I don't know, it's just like the only redeeming factor of the show is Al-Anon. I think he did a really good job. Um, but the whole like relationship stuff is really eye rolling. It's like, oh, please, really. Um, so I didn't like that part of I didn't like that part of the adaptation at all. Would I say it's bad? Mm, I'd probably give it like a 3 out of 5 as an adaptation, maybe a
That's
two
not
point
that bad.
five. Yeah, I've seen worse. Like it's watchable. It's it's not so bad for me at least that I'll just kind of dismiss it. It's watchable. There's some parts that like make no sense, of course, when you compare it to the book, but it is what it is. And I haven't finished it either. Like the first season I watched, I didn't watch the second season. And I know there's some characters that come up from the third book in the second season, so I didn't finish it. I think I watched like one episode of the second season.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not very good. I wouldn't say it's good. It's
But not
like
the
on the
worst.
basis level, it's entertaining, but it's not like good. I
Okay.
think you can still be entertained by something that's not good.
Yeah.
What I recommend it, I would recommend it to only people who have actually read the books. If I'd say to just some random person, I wouldn't recommend it to them. I would just say, if you read the books, it's probably some value for you. But if not, I'd say just skip it. You don't need to watch it.
Okay. Maybe I'll
That's what
reread some of the books and maybe check it out after I do that. That sounds like a good idea since I don't remember the very books very well since I read them when I was in elementary or high school.
Yeah, you'd actually have to read all three before you could even watch the first show.
Yeah, that's probably a
Because
good
the
idea.
first show it's based on the second book and it has characters from the third book.
Right. Okay.
So there's that. I also found out that Carrie Goodkind's series has 21 books.
Oh yeah, you told me that there were a lot. Yeah,
21.
that's
That's
a
and the
lot.
first book is I think 800 pages.
Are they all like Wheel of Time length?
I have no idea. I just know the first book I read was like 800 pages.
Oh, okay.
Um, that's all I know. My library only carries that first book, and I think one of his more recent books, so I don't think I'll be diving into it.
Which one, sorry?
The first book and one of the more recent releases he's had. There are no other books that my library carries, despite him writing 21 books in the series.
That's weird.
Yeah, yeah. There are some weird discrepancies. Like I can't get a King Killer Chronicle audiobook. Apparently, they don't carry it. They don't carry all of Terry Brooks's books. So it's some books you think they would have, they don't at my library.
And you have a way bigger selection than me too.
Yeah, it's a huge one. Like a ridiculous amount of books at this because it's for the DC area, so and it's pulling from like 25-ish libraries are all using this system. So it's what I want to do eventually is see if I can get my sister to get a library card and then use her information so I can have a secondary book checkout. And sometimes I feel like I'm not allowed to check out or at least waitlist as much books as I need to. Since the maximum is 10. I could check out a maximum of 10 and I could waitlist a maximum of 10.
So why do you need to have more than 10 out at once and more than 10 on a wait
I
list?
think I think it's mostly the waitlist because sometimes I'll be waiting for a waitlist book.
Oh yeah,
I'd rather always have a waitlist book available than have to wait for one.
and yeah, you said that you've told me before that you sometimes have to wait for like over a year depending on the book too.
Yeah, Blink. I waited over a year for that.
Yeah,
I'm not saying it was a waste of time. It wasn't. I enjoyed the book,
yeah,
but man, it took up a whole spot on my wait list for a year.
right.
So when you know that can happen, you can start getting really selective about your waitlist books. I think if I had another library card to another library system, I would be a little less selective.
Okay, that makes sense.
But damn, I haven't even talked about what else I was reading. Okay, so yeah, Terry Goodkind, Wizard's First Rule. Here's what I'd say: if my library carried the next book in the series, I'd probably read it, and I'm not kidding you.
If we actually lived close to each other, I would just lend you it because I got like because I liked the first one when I first started reading it. I actually coincidentally I was staying with my aunt and uncle at the time after there was an evacuation because there was a wildfire here, and we went to this recycling place, which is also a place that people can donate books, and you can take any that you want for free. So there were coincidentally like I think the first 6 or more books in that series, so I just got them all for free.
Oh, not bad.
Yeah.
I'd say that while despite I gave it a not so favorable review, I'm still kind of interested on how the story progresses, and because I am kind of interested to see what else that comes next. Um, so I don't know. I don't want to buy it because I don't particularly like good kinds. Um, I don't know. He just shits on authors and other people. He's not really that good of a person from what I've heard. And I went to R Fantasy, which is a Reddit thread about fantasy genre. There's basically like a blanket hatred for him on that Reddit thread, which is kind of funny.
I don't really care. Well, to an extent at least, I don't really care that much what an author is like as a person. Like I care about what they write. Although like if I've seen interviews with like Stephen King and Neil Gaiman and Brandon Sanderson and people like that, and I can see that they're really kind and down to earth people like that, it certainly makes me more prone to liking their work. But like how good of a person someone is doesn't necessarily correlate to what their writing is like.
No, I totally understand that. Like, if I went purely on Terry Goodkind's behavior and his remarks, I probably would never have read anything he's written, because he's talked shit about Robert Jordan despite stealing blanket ideas from him.
Yeah.
Like for instance, the Mord Sith is basically like a Suldom. It's the same concept. They put a collar around your neck and they control you through magic.
Oh wow, I sure didn't remember that. Yeah. That is like
You don't remember? That's like the whole BDS. They're like BDSM versions of Suldom. They control you with your own magic. Um, they can detect if you're lying and all that stuff. They can punish you through it. It's the same exact thing.
yeah, that is like exactly the same thing.
And that book was written after The Great Hunt. So
Yeah.
I don't know. It could be, I don't know. But
Well, I mean, like
anyway,
repeating tropes can be interesting if you do it in an interesting way, like how.
well, I think he did do it in an interesting way. But
Well, I mean, like
yeah,
how I was gonna say how like how Robert Jordan copied some Tolkien tropes, for example, but then like expanded on them exponentially and looked at them in some of them in different ways too.
yeah. So I am interested in more of the sort of chosen universe just to see how it goes. Um, and I may, if I can find like a cheap used copy, I'll buy one. But I'm not going to buy a brand spanking new one.
Yeah.
Because that
Well,
money
and
goes to charity.
don't feel pressured to do so just by me mostly playing devil's advocate here.
I should what do what?
Oh, buy those books.
No, I'd buy it only if I could buy it used.
Right.
Okay, if I buy the book, the money that I use to buy it can't get into Terry Goodkin's hands because I don't want to really monetarily support the guy.
How would you buy one of his books without supporting him in any way?
Buy it used.
Oh, right. Yeah, of course. That makes sense.
Because the money goes to the guy that I bought it from, not the Terry Goodkin.
Right.
Um, yeah, there's no royalty from a used book sale. So that's
Yeah,
basically that's basically the only way I'm going to get my hands on the book since my library doesn't carry it. Like, or maybe I could find the audiobook version on YouTube. Maybe I should look into that.
I have not checked for those.
If I could find it that way, then bam, that's what I'll try.
Yeah. I mean, like even like I've said before, this was before I read better fantasy than this series, so I had lower standards. But even then, when I read them, I still kind of got bored of the books after the second or third one because it seemed like they got repetitive and just boring and going off in like really typical and predictable storylines like that main character Richard. All these women were like falling all over him all this time and he was like rejecting their sexual advances and being
That happens in the first
unrealistically
book.
noble.
Yeah.
But even more of an extent when he's actually like in a position of massive authority or something like that.
But Rand kind of does that too sometimes. So what do you think about that?
Definitely, yeah.
Well,
I
you
find
get the
that,
sense that Rand was kind of raised in a Puritan culture.
yeah, you get that. Like you get that in most fantasy series. That's what I like about grim dark fantasy. There is none of that. They're more realistic. Like, oh, this chick's coming on to me. We should fuck.
Well, that's not. I wouldn't say that's always the case because Matt is like that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I'm not saying it's
Matt,
always the case. I'm saying it's a common trope.
oh yeah, it's a common trope that they're a Puritan country bumpkin. Yeah. Um, dang, that was a long discussion about that particular book. I finished The Talent Code, also by Daniel Coyle, in between my two readings of The Culture Code. If I were to recommend one of two, I'd actually recommend really The Talent Code. It's a very good book. And I feel that The Talent Code isn't a prescriptive book, it's a descriptive book. So it basically describes the talent clusters, how they're cultivated, what makes them tick.
Oh, I think maybe I actually did read that one because I think I remember it was a long time ago, but I might have written a blog about it. So correct me if I'm wrong, but is it that book that in one section I remember going describing how a tennis player learns, and that was where I learned about the idea of myelination.
Yes. The
Oh, okay.
talent code is very big on myelination.
Okay.
That is one of the main tenets that they speak about, how myelination occurs, how people become productive when they practice. So yeah, that's one of the very big ideas that they discuss. And a lot of Carol Dweck stuff comes up in this book too.
Oh, okay.
um,
I still
which is
haven't read. I still haven't read her book called Growth Mindset. I should.
yeah, me neither, but it's definitely on my list. But she comes up a lot, and a lot of well, the reason she comes up a lot is because people who have positive attitudes towards their practice end up being people who actually become successful.
Right.
Um, so if you're like throwing a kid into something and they're not really into it, it's likely that nothing will ever come of it. So it's good to listen to those cues when you're perhaps raising kids and trying to figure out what type of extracurricular activities that they might stick with. I think one of the things too they talk about when kids are choosing instruments is if they say that they're happy and they like choosing playing a specific instrument, then just keep them on it, you know. And if you
Yeah.
do choose to keep them on it, you can actually introduce similar instruments so that they can become, you know, talented or well versed in specific set of instrument types.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I also finished the fourth book of the. Did I finish that? Yeah, I finished the fourth book of the Valorian series. It's all right.
Oh yeah, you were telling me about that one. That's the David Eddings series.
Yeah. So the third one was pretty boring.
Is that the one that took place almost entirely in one room or something like that?
Well, it took entirely in one city, like half of the book.
Okay.
A lot of these David Edding books tend to be adventures that span landscapes, and the third book, he spent half of it basically as a prisoner of, well, not like a real prisoner, but as somebody who was confined to the castle of one of the lords. And I was like, yeah, what? This is like a half of the book, and there's like no adventuring going on. So I was like,
Oh, okay.
man,
That's like that sort of thing. It can be compelling if it's done well. Like, I have to reread it because that's another one that I haven't read in years because I think I was a kid the first time I read it. But I remember in The Count of Monte Cristo, a large part of that, um, a large part of that novel takes place in a prison, and the main character has been wrongfully imprisoned for crimes, and he's in there for years, and he ends up basically hatching an escape plan with the person who is in the cell next to him, and they spend years working together on an escape plan because the one guy dug a tunnel into the other guy's cell, and they work on an escape plan for years. And during this time, the main character becomes like a really smart person by learning a lot through conversation. And I think he somehow gets access to letters that guy has written about a lot of different famous books and that sort of thing. So I remember that that part of that book being compelling, even though it was a really large section. But that certainly can be boring too.
well, the reason it was boring, I guess, in the case of this is because all of the books have been basically an action adventure. So that's kind of the expectation you have going
Right,
into reading it. And when they go to this section where it's just the main character and his party imprisoned for half the book, without any adventuring or action, you're just kind of like, oh, what's going on here? Like, this is definitely not what we're used to and not what we've expected.
right,
And because of that, I was like, I wish there was some actioning and some adventuring going on right now.
right.
So that's why I gave it less of a score than I usually would give these David Eddings books.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Given what you said about expectations.
Yeah, and I've also been I don't even mention these. So I read comic books, and it goes into my Goodreads stuff too.
Oh, I didn't
But
even know.
well, there's this comic book series. Well, it's a Japanese comic book series called Elfen Lied. Only thing I'm gonna say is it's super edgy, and it's not really for the faint of heart.
What's it called?
It's called Elfen Lied.
Okay.
Lied is Lied. It's like German. Means elf song or something like that. But it's a science fiction ish type of manga. It's about these girls who have horns, and they're basically a genetic evolution that's meant to destroy the current race of humans and replace them. One of them grows a kind heart, and kind of it goes from there. But there's like a lot of weird themes and very strong sexual content, um, like child rape and crazy stuff like that.
Wow.
And that's why I say it's not for the faint of heart. It's like really
Yeah.
edgy.
Yeah.
So if you can stomach that kind of stuff, then I'd say check it out. It's just really edgy content,
Okay.
and I've been slowly getting through the Wheel of Time on the Fires of Heaven.
So you'll have it done by the time we do the chat on it for sure, I bet, hey?
Yeah, it's gonna be. Oh man, I wish I would get it done quicker. Is this the? I don't know what it is about Robert Jordan books, but they slow my reading pace to a crawl. Like
Yeah?
I cannot read these books quickly. Like I know it took me a while to read The Sword of Truth, but it wasn't because I I was reading it slow. It's because I just wasn't picking it up a lot.
Right.
Um, like for instance, on my way home from work yesterday, which is like a 40 minute, no, it's like a 30 minute drive because I took the bus yesterday, and I only got through 10 pages
In
during the
40
bus
minutes?
ride. 30 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I read them very slowly and deliberately.
Okay.
Um,
You study
I
them.
don't know why. I guess you could say that. I don't know why I read them so slowly and deliberately. I feel like if I read them too fast, I'm missing out on something. So I'm basically just reading it at the rate that maybe podcast, or no, I'm sorry, the narrator may read the book, maybe a little bit faster than that.
You're
But that's,
scholar of Wheel of Time. It's like the way I read philosophy.
oh, you read it slowly?
Yeah, I actually do because it's so a lot of the time when you read a paragraph about philosophy, there's so much fucking information in there. It's very challenging to read it quickly. Like they reference all sorts of abstract philosophical ideas and all sorts of other philosophers. I liked the analogy that Hayden Bruce made one time when we were talking about that. He said, reading a philosophical text is like it's like watching an Avengers movie. You have to know about all of the other characters, like if we compare them to the other philosophers, and you have to know the history going into the ideas that they discuss. So it's like how if you watch like he was saying that when his wife watched the newest Avengers movie with him, she liked it, but she was confused because she hadn't seen a whole bunch of the other movies in the MCU, and you kind of have
Hmm.
to have seen some of them to fully understand what's going on. And it's similar
Hmm.
to philosophy in that you'll be confused unless you've read about some of those other thinkers and ideas before you come to whatever philosophical text. So it's like you have to do homework to be able to really figure out what's going on.
Yeah, because even with Infinity War, before I even watched the movie, I went and read the comic book series.
Oh yeah, I think you told me
So,
that.
so
Yeah.
I can compare and contrast. And it's like, whoa, yeah, there's a lot of difference there. So there's
Yeah.
even homework outside of the MCU by going to the original source material and checking that out.
Yeah. True.
So I guess in philosophy, that's like going further back in history to check those ideas out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I could technically read it. I think I could read it faster. I just enjoy it slow. I think I'm reading it slow more out of enjoyment than anything else. Because I really like the series. But I think for any okay, Terry Good kind of just kind of sped through it. I didn't really hear too much about what was on screen or on the page. Like the other book, what's another book that I read recently? That I took my time with. I can't even
Fires of
think.
Heaven.
Well,
Oh
I've
wait,
been taking my
that's
time
what
with
you're
that the
talking
whole
about.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Um,
There's other. It's not the only fantasy series that I take my time with. Trying to think of what other physical books that I've read. I think I read. Oh, I read that kind of fast too. Because Sanderson's writing is pretty clear and concise.
I was gonna ask you about Mistborn and Stormlight Archive, but have you read those as physical books, or have you just listened
I
to
read
books?
I both read and listened to the Secret Histories.
Oh, okay.
So the first time I went through the Secret History, I read it in the ebook form, and then I found Sanderson's compilations, and I started listening to stories from that, and then I re-listened to the Secret History in that book.
Oh, okay.
So I've gone through it both times, and I think when I actually read it, I actually got through it pretty quickly. I think it's just, I think it's just Robert Jordan's writing style that tends to slow me down. It's not like Sanderson is concise, um, and Robert Jordan, there's like a lot of subtlety in his writing, and
Yeah.
sometimes you just can't really consume it that quick.
Well, almost like especially if you've already read the series, because you know that there's so much more subtext and subtlety to process.
Yeah, because when I first went through the series, it was all on audiobook. I went through the entire thing in audiobook, but I also did not speed it up. So I was listening to it at its normal speed when I was first getting through it.
Oh, okay.
And that was because I just probably didn't know better, to be honest. But um, I don't know. I get through these things slowly. I just cannot pinpoint why, other than the writing style forces me to slow down a bit.
Well, I
So I think
mean,
if he had a more direct style like Sanderson, I'd probably be able to get through it quicker.
I see what you mean. Yeah, I was gonna say
Like I
there's
like
super
Sanderson too, but I can read Sanderson faster.
right. Yeah, I see what you mean. I was gonna say that the Wheel of Time books are super long anyway, but obviously the Stormlight Archive books are longer than some of the Wheel of Time books.
Yeah, they're longer than most. So
Yeah,
I think there's only three, and they're all over 1,000 pages. I think the
yeah, those
last
are
book is like 1,200.
yeah, that's a fucking lot.
Yeah, so it's giant. They're giant books, and these are 1,200 hardback pages, not mass market paperback pages.
Must be like
Um,
1,400 mass market.
yeah, it must be ridiculously. Like I couldn't even imagine what a mass market paperback of um, one of these books would look like. It just looked like
Probably
a block of paper.
well, it's like one of the Song of Ice and Fire books, because I think a couple of them, or at least one of them, is like 1,200 pages or so in paperback. But even that's not like what one of the Stormlight Archive books would be.
Yeah, because it's 1,200 in hardback. So
Yeah,
if it's 1,200 in hardback, the paperback must be ridiculous.
yeah.
But yeah, I guess that's it for what I've been reading. Yeah, and my next forays will be part 5 and the final parts of the Malorian of David Eddings, and then after that on my plate, I have Foundation. I think this is the first book in publication order, but the third book in the chronological order of the series.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. When I read those, I'm pretty sure I read the original trilogy first, and I don't remember what order after that, but I did read the prequels at some point. I might have read them in order of publication. I
Mm.
think that's what I might have done because
Yeah, so I'm gonna
they're
stick to publication order in this case.
'cause I think
I think
there are other sequels after the original trilogy too, right?
I have no idea. This is like my first foray. I don't know much about the Foundation series, but I will once I start getting into this book.
Okay. So if there are two prequels, I'm pretty sure there are at least 6 books in total. I think there might be 7, but I could be totally wrong about that.
Mm. Yeah, certainly possible. So, yeah, I think that much wraps it up. I'm not sure what we're going to do next week. I think next week's going to be a mixed movie arts chat about something. I'll figure
Okay.
it out.
You could
Not
do Matrix
the.
Reloaded unless you want to do like a silly one or a completely different one. Oh yeah, there are 7 books in the Foundation series.
Oh, great,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, we could do. One of the things I thought about. Hmm, I thought of doing maybe a combination, but I haven't finished it yet because I was thinking of doing the combination of the Battle Angel manga and the movie.
Oh,
I
okay.
think I think that would be an interesting combination to look at. As it looks like the mangas. I think I sent you a link where you can actually read it.
I'm not
At
sure.
least
You
the
might.
first volume.
I think you might have. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I sent you a link to the first volume, I think.
Okay.
Um, but I don't think we're gonna do that next week. Yeah, actually, The Matrix Part 3 next week sounds good. I think we could
Okay.
do Reloaded next week. That means I'll have to
Revolutions.
watch it. Oh yeah, Revolutions. We did Reloaded.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll have to watch it, do 7 pages of notes or whatever, and then we'll talk about it.
All right. Cool.
And then I got to think of the next major book chat. I'm thinking possibly the autobiography of Malcolm X, maybe.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I
Have you
have.
read that one yet?
No, I haven't. I read a book called Malcolm X
Malcolm
by
X? Yeah,
yeah,
I've
by
seen that at the library.
Manning Marable. That one was
Mm,
interesting. I haven't read the autobiography though. I think
yeah.
it would have been if I had I could be remembering this wrong, but
Hmm.
if I remember correctly, it might have been a better idea for me to read the autobiography first, because if I remember correctly, Manning Marable talks about the autobiography in that book.
Hmm.
So, yeah, but as long as I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that will be the next chat a month from now, so that would give me some time to read it. I
Okay.
If you don't have it, hopefully your library has it. If your library doesn't have it, they sell it on Amazon for like $5. It's pretty cheap.
Okay.
Um, I picked it up because I was like $5, and it was recommended to me. Like, might as well. So I went and purchased it for $5 off of Amazon.
Okay.
I think we'll do that in a month's time. I guess the next Jesus. I'm gonna because I need to catch up with Wheel of Time. We're not gonna do a Wheel of Time book in August
Okay.
because I'm taking way too long. before I even set another Wheel of Time chat, I need to finish this book 5. I'm like 200 pages. I have 200 pages left.
Why do
If
you need
I'm
to?
good on my reading, because I don't want to catch up to where my because I read at my leisure and then right up to the day I do an audiobook listen.
Oh, okay, so you want to finish reading it first and then listen to the whole audiobook?
Well, this is book 5, so when we get to book 5, yeah. Book 4, I just would need to listen to the audiobook.
Oh, right, of course.
But yeah, I just don't want it to catch up with me. I just need to make more time and for reading,
I
basically.
see what you mean. You want to finish reading the 5th book before you
I
listen to
start
the
the 4th
audiobook
book, yeah.
of the 4th. Yeah, okay.
I
Yeah.
think what I want to do always is make sure I finish reading the physical copy of book ahead before I start a chat about the book before it.
Okay.
So once I finish reading the physical, I'll be able to set a date. Um, it's just hard fitting all of this reading. I'm sure you have that problem too, because you got to read all these philosophy texts for your different endeavors, and then it's just
Right.
hard fitting the reading in. Just the basic reading in outside of everything else we got to fit in
Yeah.
to to do like these little shows, like watching a movie and writing notes about it. Like everybody, there is work that goes into this stuff. It's not like, oh, this is coming off straight off the top of my head. Look, I'm writing notes. Like in the case of the culture code, I went through the book twice in 2 weeks.
Right.
So, yeah, we're definitely working on stuff here.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's behind the scenes, there's hard work going on. It's not just like, hey, I just read this and boom, I remember this like it was the back of my hand. It doesn't quite work like that for me. So in order for me to do a good job, I have to consume the material at least before we talk about it. I like to have it fresh in my mind, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I like to have it fresh in my mind too.
So, on that note, I guess we could start to do the wrap up. You can go ahead and plug away there.
All right. Yeah, if people want to, they can check out my YouTube channel, which is Mindgasms. And yeah, like I was saying, I do lots of deep dives into philosophy and and I do discussions about all sorts of other topics. And yeah, I read chapters of my novel, and then sometimes on there and do vlogs about ideas or what I call quickies too. Like I did one about how Trump is a postmodern president, and I've been slowly doing a vlog series on Foucault's history of sexuality. And yeah, also if people want to, they can check out my blog at mindgasms.theblogpress.com, where I write blogs about ideas and publish chapters of my novel and short stories and poems sometimes as well. And also, if people want to, they can contribute to me on Patreon, which is at Mindgasms as well. I greatly appreciate that. And then I'm on the social medias, the Facebooky Booha and the Twitter at Andrew Meintzer. And my name has that my last name has that weird German spelling, Meintzer. And yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you, Andrew, for coming on today on the Mixed Martial Arts chat about the culture code. Of course, you could always reach out to us at the Mixed Martial Arts Facebook page, and you can check out our discussions that we have on that page. It ranges mostly around politics, psychology, science, your average mixed martial arts types of subjects. We have a Twitter account. You can follow that. Most importantly, thank all the Patreons for continuing to help us grow this channel. Please like and subscribe, and most of all, share the content. And always participate in the comment section. We're always happy to hear you guys commenting on things. And also Patreon. Yeah, so we do have a Patreon page. If you'd like to help support us, check it out. That's /MixMillArts, or search MixMillArts on the patreon.com website. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, and have a great evening.
Yep. Adios until next time, everyone.
Yeah. And that will be Matrix Revolutions.
Yes.
All right.
Mecha
Bye-bye.